The strangest part wasn't that Olivia was smiling. It was where she was smiling. 3 hours after their grandfather's funeral, the entire Carter family sat inside a lawyer's office waiting for the reading of his will. Some people were still crying. Others stared blankly at the floor. The scent of rain drifted through the partially open window, mixing with the smell of coffee and old paper. It should have been a room filled with grief. Instead, Emily couldn't stop looking at her younger sister, because Olivia looked excited, not emotional, not heartbroken, excited, like a woman sitting in an airport waiting for a flight to somewhere she'd always dreamed of going. And somehow that hurt Emily more than anything else that had happened that week. Their grandfather had just been buried. William Carter. The man who had raised them as much as their parents had. The man who had built the Carter family business from nothing. The man who never missed a birthday, a graduation, or a school play. The man who always showed up. And yet Olivia looked like she couldn't wait for the next part. The money part. The inheritance part. The part everyone pretended they weren't thinking about. Emily shifted in her chair and looked away. She didn't want to be here. Not really. She would have happily walked away from every dollar her grandfather owned if it meant hearing his voice one more time. The attorney sat at the end of the long conference table sorting through documents. Nobody spoke. Nobody knew what to say. Then Olivia leaned toward her husband, Daniel. Even after all these years, seeing them together still felt strange. Daniel whispered something. Olivia laughed softly, and Emily felt an old wound open. Not fully. Just enough to remind her it was still there. Funny how betrayal worked. People always assumed pain disappeared with time. It didn't. It changed shape. It got quieter. Less sharp. But it never truly left. Some scars stayed with you forever. Daniel had once been her future. At least she thought he was. There had been a time when she knew exactly how her life was going to unfold. Marriage, children, a house with a white fence, Sunday dinners, growing old together, simple dreams, normal dreams. Then one day she discovered her sister had been sleeping with him behind her back. Just like that. Years of trust disappeared overnight. Sometimes Emily still remembered the exact moment she found out. The exact feeling. The exact look on Olivia's face. No guilt. No shame. Just victory. As if stealing someone else's happiness was an accomplishment. The memory still made her stomach turn. Not because she wanted Daniel back. She didn't. That part of her life was long over. What hurt was realizing someone you loved had been capable of doing something like that. Because when a stranger betrays you, it hurts. When family does it, it changes you. The attorney cleared his throat. The sound pulled everyone back to the present. We'll begin shortly. Olivia immediately sat straighter. Emily noticed. It was almost impossible not to. The attorney opened a folder. Before he could speak, Olivia raised her hand. Can I ask something first? The room turned toward her. The attorney nodded politely. Of course. Olivia smiled. How recently was the will updated? A few relatives exchanged uncomfortable looks. Emily lowered her eyes. There it was. The question everyone was thinking but knew better than to ask. Except Olivia never cared what other people thought. The attorney checked a document. The final revisions were completed approximately 4 years ago. Olivia nodded. Satisfied. Daniel looked relieved. Emily noticed that too, and suddenly she found herself wondering why. Why did that answer matter so much? Why did they seem so eager? Then again, she already knew the answer. Money. The answer was always money. Her grandfather had spent decades building an empire. Commercial properties, office buildings, residential developments, investments, land. Assets spread across several states. The Carter fortune was worth far more than most people realized, and Olivia had spent years acting like it already belonged to her. Emily remembered family dinners where Olivia openly talked about future renovations she planned to make to their grandfather's estate. As if ownership was guaranteed. As if inheritance was a birthright. William always laughed when she did that. At the time, Emily thought he found it amusing. Now she wasn't so sure. A knock interrupted the silence. The office door opened. A young assistant stepped inside carrying a sealed envelope. "I'm sorry to interrupt." She handed it to the attorney. "This arrived this morning." The attorney frowned. His expression changed immediately. Not dramatically, just enough for Emily to notice. Confusion. Surprise. Something. The attorney turned the envelope over, studied it, then placed it beside the rest of the paperwork. "We'll address this later." Olivia's eyes narrowed. Emily noticed that too. Her sister hated surprises, especially when they involved money. For some reason, Emily couldn't stop staring at the envelope. Something about it felt important. The attorney finally looked up. "Before we begin the formal reading, Mr. Carter left a personal statement." The room instantly grew quiet. This wasn't legal language. This was William. One final message. The attorney unfolded a sheet of paper, then began reading. "If you're hearing this, I've finally run out of time." Several relatives laughed softly through their tears. Emily smiled. That sounded exactly like him. The attorney continued. "I never liked speeches, so I'll keep this brief." Another smile. Another familiar sentence. Emily could practically hear his voice. "If you're sitting in this room wondering who gets what, you've already missed the point." This time nobody laughed. Especially Olivia. The room became noticeably uncomfortable. The attorney continued reading. "The most valuable things I leave behind cannot be counted." Emily felt her throat tighten. Because she already knew where this was going. William had spent her entire life teaching the same lesson, over and over, in different ways, different words, the same lesson. Character mattered, always, more than money, more than status, more than success. The attorney continued, "Money reveals people. Silence. Success reveals people. More silence. Power reveals people." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The attorney looked down at the final line. Then read it slowly. "The only thing that matters is who you are when nobody is watching." The room went completely still. Emily stared at the photograph sitting beside the attorney. William Carter. The man who bit everything. The man who seemed to understand people better than anyone she'd ever known. For a moment she forgot about the inheritance. Forgot about Olivia. Forgot about Daniel. Forgot about all of it. She simply missed him. The attorney folded the paper. "We'll now proceed with the reading." Across the room, Olivia exhaled. Almost impatiently, as though the meaningful part was over. As though the real event was finally beginning. Emily watched her sister and felt something unexpected. Not anger. Not bitterness. Pity. Because Olivia still didn't understand. Even now. Even after hearing those words. She still believed life was measured by what people owned, not who they were. And for the first time, Emily wondered if her sister had ever actually been happy, or if she'd spent her entire life chasing victories that never felt like enough. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance. Dark clouds gathered over the city. The room grew slightly darker. Nobody seemed to notice. Nobody except Emily, because she suddenly had a feeling she couldn't explain. Something was about to happen. Something nobody expected. Her eyes drifted back to the sealed envelope. Still unopened. Still waiting. And somehow it felt more important than the will itself. Across the table, Olivia smiled confidently. Certain she had already won. Certain the future belonged to her. Certain every choice she'd made had finally paid off. Emily looked away. Because a memory surfaced from years ago. A lesson William had taught her when she was barely a teenager. A lesson that suddenly felt important. Be careful of people who celebrate before the race is over. At the time, she thought he was talking about business. sitting in that lawyer's office, watching Olivia smile at a future she hadn't received yet. Emily began to wonder if he had meant something else entirely, and deep inside, a quiet question began to form. What if Olivia wasn't about to win at all? If your own sister secretly married the person you planned to spend your life with, would you ever forgive her? Or would that betrayal end the relationship forever? Let me know in the comments. Most people think betrayal begins with a single moment, a kiss, a lie, a secret. But that's not how it happens. Betrayal usually starts long before anyone realizes it. It starts with small things, tiny moments that seem harmless at the time, a look that lasts a little too long, a conversation that feels slightly different, a joke nobody else understands. Then one day you look back and realize the disaster began months earlier. Maybe years. Sitting in the lawyer's office, waiting for the reading of the will, Emily found herself drifting into memories she hadn't visited in a long time. Memories she usually avoided. Because some memories hurt no matter how much time passes. And this one started with a family barbecue. 7 years earlier. Back when everything still seemed normal. Back when Daniel belonged to her. Back before Olivia took an interest in him. The Carter family gathered every summer at William's lake house. It was one of the few traditions everyone still respected. No matter how busy life became, people showed up. The house sat on several acres overlooking a quiet lake surrounded by pine trees. William loved the place. He often joked that it was the only property he'd ever owned that wasn't meant to make money. Emily arrived that afternoon carrying a bowl of potato salad and Daniel carrying enough food to feed an army. William greeted them at the door. About time. Daniel laughed. We're only 10 minutes late. That's still late. William pulled Emily into a hug, then clapped Daniel on the shoulder. Emily remembered how natural it all felt, how comfortable, how easy. At the time, she genuinely believed Daniel was already part of the family. Most people did. They had been together for nearly 4 years. Everyone expected an engagement soon. Even William, especially William. He liked Daniel, trusted him, or at least he thought he did. The afternoon passed exactly as family gatherings usually did. Food, stories, arguments about sports, children running around the yard. Normal life. The kind of moments people never appreciate until they're gone. Emily spent most of the day helping in the kitchen. At one point, she stepped outside carrying a tray of drinks. That's when she noticed something strange. Daniel and Olivia standing near the dock, talking. Nothing unusual about that, at least not initially. They were family, or close enough. People talked. People laughed. People interacted. That wasn't strange. What bothered her was the way they stopped talking when she approached. The conversation ended instantly, like someone had flipped a switch. Daniel looked away. Olivia smiled. Too quickly. Too brightly. The moment lasted maybe 2 seconds. Then everything returned to normal. Emily forgot about it almost immediately. Because why wouldn't she? Trust is funny. When you trust someone completely, your brain automatically explains away suspicious things. You don't want to believe the worst, so you don't. You find innocent explanations, reasonable explanations, comfortable explanations. And that's exactly what Emily did. The memory shifted. A different day. Several months later, Daniel had started receiving more text messages than usual. Again, not strange. People have friends, coworkers, family. Life happens. But Emily noticed something. Whenever his phone lit up, Daniel checked it immediately. Every time, no exceptions. One evening they were eating dinner together when a message appeared. Daniel grabbed the phone so quickly he nearly knocked over his drink. Emily laughed. Important. Daniel forced a smile. Just work. She accepted the answer. Because that's what people in love do. They trust. At least until trust is broken. The warning signs kept appearing. Small, insignificant, easy to ignore. Daniel becoming protective of his phone. Olivia suddenly mentioning Daniel more often. Family events where they somehow ended up talking alone. Tiny things. Nothing that could be proven. Nothing concrete. Looking back now, Emily wondered if her grandfather noticed. William noticed everything. Sometimes it felt like he had a sixth sense for people. He could walk into a room and immediately understand dynamics nobody else saw. Maybe he saw it. Maybe he suspected. Maybe that's why some of his behavior changed later. The thought lingered. Then another memory surfaced. One she had never forgotten. Christmas. 2 years before the betrayal exploded, the entire family gathered at William's house. Snow covered the ground outside. Fire crackled in the living room. Everyone exchanged gifts. At some point, William called Emily into his office. She found him standing near the window, watching snowfall. "Everything okay?" she asked. William nodded, then remained silent. A long silence, the kind that made her uncomfortable. Finally he spoke. "How are things with Daniel?" Emily smiled. "Good. Just good." She laughed. "Very good." William nodded slowly, still staring out the window. Then he asked a strange question. "Do you trust him?" The question caught her off guard. "Of course. Completely." Emily didn't hesitate. "Yes." William remained quiet. Too quiet. Now, years later, that conversation haunted her, because she remembered the look on his face. Concern. Not fear. Not suspicion. Concern. As though he was debating whether to say something, then deciding not to. Eventually, he changed the subject, and neither of them mentioned it again. At the time, she thought nothing of it. Today, she wasn't so sure. Maybe William had seen cracks before anyone else. Maybe he noticed something she didn't. Or maybe he simply understood human nature better than the rest of them. The memory faded. Another appeared. This one hurt more. Because this was where everything changed. It happened on a Thursday. Emily remembered because she had spent the entire morning planning a surprise dinner for Daniel. Nothing extravagant. Just their favorite restaurant. A quiet evening together. She had even picked up a gift. A watch Daniel had mentioned months earlier. Small things. The kind of things people do when they're in love. Around noon she left work early. The restaurant reservation wasn't until evening. She had plenty of time. On the drive home she realized she'd forgotten some paperwork at Daniel's apartment. She had a key, so she stopped there first. A decision that would change everything. Funny how life works. Huge moments often begin with completely ordinary choices. Emily unlocked the door, walked inside, and immediately knew something was wrong. At first she couldn't explain why. The apartment looked normal. Everything seemed normal. Yet something felt different. Then she heard laughter. From the bedroom. A woman's laughter. Her heart stopped. Not figuratively. Actually, for one terrible second it felt like her body forgot how to function. Emily walked toward the hallway. Slowly. Every step felt unreal. Like she was watching someone else move. Someone else breathe. Someone else live through the nightmare. Then she reached the bedroom. The door wasn't fully closed, just slightly open. And through that opening, her entire future shattered. Because the woman in Daniel's bed wasn't a stranger. It wasn't some random affair. It wasn't someone she had never met. It was Olivia. Her sister. Her own sister. For a moment the world simply stopped. No sound, no movement, nothing, just disbelief. Because some things are so painful your brain refuses to process them. You see them, but you don't understand them. Not immediately. The laughter ended. Olivia looked toward the doorway. Their eyes met. Emily would remember that moment for the rest of her life. Not because of what Olivia did, because of what she didn't do. She didn't look ashamed. She didn't look guilty. She didn't look horrified. She looked caught. There was a difference. A massive difference. Daniel jumped from the bed. Started talking. Started explaining. Started making excuses. Emily never heard a word. Not really. Everything became noise. Meaningless noise. The only thing she could hear was her own heartbeat. The only thing she could think was one impossible question. How long? How long had this been happening? Weeks? Months? Years? How many family dinners? How many holidays? How many conversations? How many lies? And perhaps worst of all, how many times had they looked her in the eye while keeping their secret? Back in the lawyer's office, Emily blinked. The memory vanished. The conference room returned. The attorney was still organizing paperwork. The will still hadn't been read. Across the room, Olivia sat beside Daniel. Comfortable. Confident. As though none of that history mattered anymore. As though enough time had passed. Maybe for Olivia it had. Maybe for Daniel too. But some betrayals leave fingerprints on your soul. They never completely disappear. And as Emily looked at the two people who had changed her life forever, she couldn't shake a strange feeling. Because for years Olivia had acted like she won. She got the man. She got the marriage. She got the life Emily was supposed to have. But something about today felt different. Something about that unopened envelope. Something about William's final message. Something about the storm gathering outside. For the first time in years, Emily found herself wondering something she had never considered before. What if the story wasn't over? What if Olivia's victory had only been the beginning? The strange thing about having your heart broken is that the world keeps moving. The sun still rises. People still go to work. Traffic still fills the roads. Bills still arrive in the mail. Everything continues exactly as it did before. Except you don't. For weeks after discovering Daniel and Olivia together, Emily moved through life like a ghost. She went to work. She answered emails. She attended meetings. She smiled when people expected her to smile. But none of it felt real. The betrayal had created a crack inside her, and every day that crack seemed to grow a little larger. The worst part wasn't losing Daniel. That realization surprised her. She expected to miss him more, expected to spend nights crying over the future they had planned together. Instead, she found herself mourning something else. Trust. Because once trust is destroyed, it changes how you see everyone. Every conversation becomes a question. Every promise becomes uncertain. Every smile becomes suspect. And when the people responsible are your own sister and the man you loved, rebuilding that trust feels impossible. 3 days after the discovery, Olivia finally called. Emily stared at the phone as it rang, then rang again, then again. Eventually she answered. Not because she wanted to talk, because she wanted answers. Emily. What? The silence that followed lasted several seconds, long enough for Olivia to realize this conversation wasn't going to be easy. I know you're upset. Emily laughed. Actually laughed. A cold, bitter laugh that surprised even her. Upset? Please don't do this. Do what? You know what? Emily stood and walked toward her apartment window. Outside, rain streaked across the glass. I walked into his bedroom. Silence. I saw you in his bed. More silence. You don't get to tell me how I should react. Olivia exhaled heavily. Then came the sentence Emily would never forget. We didn't mean for it to happen. Emily closed her eyes. There it was, the excuse. The predictable excuse. The one cheaters always seem to use. As if betrayal was some natural disaster. As if they had slipped and accidentally fallen into each other's arms. How long? Emily asked. Olivia didn't answer immediately, and that hesitation told her everything. Because innocent people answer quickly, guilty people calculate. Olivia. A few months. Emily felt sick. A few months. Months of family dinners. Months of lies. Months of pretending. Months of looking her in the eye while keeping the secret. You lied. I'm not. How long? Another pause. Longer this time. Then Olivia spoke quietly. Almost a year. The words hit like a punch. Almost a year. 365 days. An entire year. An entire year of deception. An entire year of humiliation she didn't even know was happening. Emily ended the call. Not because she was angry. because there was nothing left to say. Over the following weeks, the story spread through the family. Some relatives took sides immediately. Others tried remaining neutral. A few encouraged forgiveness. Those people frustrated Emily the most, not because forgiveness was impossible, because they wanted it immediately, as if betrayal had an expiration date, as if healing happened on a schedule. Meanwhile, Daniel tried reaching out repeatedly. Text messages, emails, voicemails. Emily ignored every one of them. Until one evening he showed up at her apartment. She almost didn't open the door. Almost. But part of her wanted to hear what he had to say. Maybe because she still needed answers. Maybe because she wanted closure. Or maybe because heartbreak makes people do strange things. Daniel looked exhausted, older somehow. As though the previous few weeks had aged him. "Can we talk?" Emily stepped aside. He entered cautiously. Like a man walking through a minefield. For several moments neither spoke. Finally Daniel broke the silence. "I'm sorry." Emily nodded. He blinked. "Okay?" "You said you're sorry." "I am. Okay." Daniel stared at her, clearly expecting something more. A fight, an argument, tears, anything. Instead he found calm. The kind of calm that appears after someone has already cried themselves empty. "I never wanted to hurt you." Emily laughed softly. Not because it was funny. Because it was absurd. "Daniel." "What?" "You had an affair with my sister." He looked away. "You hurt me." Silence. "You knew it would hurt me." More silence. "You did it anyway." Daniel rubbed his face. And for the first time Emily noticed something. He looked uncomfortable, not devastated, not heartbroken. Uncomfortable, like a man dealing with consequences. Not grief, consequences. There was a difference. A huge difference. Eventually he stood. "I do love her." Emily expected the words to hurt. Surprisingly, they didn't. Not anymore. Because the truth was finally obvious. The man she loved never really existed. She had loved an idea. A version of Daniel. A version built on honesty and loyalty. The real Daniel was standing in front of her. And she didn't recognize him. After he left, Emily sat alone in her apartment for a long time. Thinking. Remembering. Trying to understand how everything had fallen apart. Then her phone rang. This time it was William, her grandfather. She answered immediately. "Hello. Come see me tomorrow." No explanation. No details. Just the request. "Everything okay? Just come." The next afternoon she drove to his office. The same office where William had spent decades building the Carter Empire. The walls were covered with photographs. Construction projects. Ribbon cuttings. Business awards. History. William sat behind his desk reviewing documents. But the moment Emily entered, he set everything aside and simply looked at her. Really looked at her. The way grandparents sometimes do. Like they can see things everyone else misses. "You look tired." Emily smiled weakly. "I haven't been sleeping much." "No." William nodded. "I imagine not." For several moments neither spoke. Then he stood, walked toward the window, and stared out at the city. "You know what the hardest part of business is?" Emily shrugged. "Making money." William laughed. "That's actually one of the easier parts." She waited. "The hardest part is learning who people really are." Emily felt her stomach tighten. Because she knew this wasn't about business. Not really. William continued. "Most people show you who they are eventually." He turned toward her. "The problem is that we rarely want to believe them." The words landed heavily. Because they were true. Painfully true. William walked back to his desk, then opened a drawer. Inside was an old photograph. He handed it to her. The picture showed Emily as a little girl sitting beside him on a construction site. Both of them smiling. Both of them covered in dirt. Emily laughed despite herself. "I remember this. You spent the entire day trying to help. I mostly got in the way." William smiled. "Maybe." Then his expression grew serious. "Do you know what I remember?" Emily shook her head. "You stayed?" "What?" "Everyone else got bored and left." He pointed toward the photograph. You stayed. Emily looked down at the image, confused. William leaned forward. That's who you are, she didn't understand. Not yet. But William continued. Life is going to show you exactly who people are. His voice softened. Believe it when it does. For the first time in weeks, Emily felt tears forming. Because somehow her grandfather understood exactly what she needed. Not revenge. Not anger. Perspective. The betrayal still hurt. It would hurt for a long time. But sitting in that office, listening to William speak, she began realizing something important. Olivia and Daniel hadn't destroyed her future. They had revealed themselves. And maybe those weren't the same thing. As Emily left the building that afternoon, she looked back once. William was standing at the office window, watching her walk away. At the time, she thought he was simply concerned about his granddaughter. Years later, she would realize something else. William was observing, learning, paying attention, the way he always did. And although nobody knew it yet, he had already started making decisions that would change the lives of everyone in the Carter family, especially Olivia's. 6 months after the betrayal, a cream-colored envelope arrived in Emily's mailbox. She knew what it was before she opened it. Some things don't require explanations. You feel them. The weight, the timing, the sick feeling in your stomach. She carried the envelope into her apartment and placed it on the kitchen counter. For nearly an hour, she stared at it, trying to decide whether she actually wanted to know. Eventually, curiosity won. It usually does. Emily opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a wedding invitation. Olivia Carter and Daniel Reed request the honor of your presence. Emily stopped reading. For several seconds, she simply stood there, motionless, not surprised, not shocked, just exhausted. Because the invitation wasn't really an invitation. Everyone knew that. It was a statement, a declaration, a reminder. Olivia had always been like that. Winning wasn't enough. She needed witnesses. She needed people to know she had won. Emily folded the invitation and set it back on the counter. Then she walked away. 3 hours later, it was still sitting there. 3 days later, it was still sitting there. And somehow it felt like the envelope was watching her. Waiting. Demanding a decision. The phone rang on the 4th day. Emily already knew who it would be. Mom, have you seen the invitation? Emily closed her eyes. Of course. The entire family was already discussing it. Yes. Are you going? No. Her mother sighed. Not angry, not disappointed, just tired. The past several months had exhausted everyone, especially the people stuck in the middle. Emily, no, just listen. I listened for 6 months. Her mother didn't respond immediately, because there wasn't much to say. Some situations don't have solutions, only consequences. Eventually, her mother spoke softly. They're still family. Emily looked out the window. Rain tapped gently against the glass. They stopped acting like family a long time ago. The conversation ended shortly afterward. And for the next several weeks, Emily tried not to think about the wedding. She focused on work instead. It was easier, safer. Since leaving the Carter Company, she had accepted a position with a small property management firm across town. The salary wasn't impressive. The office was outdated. Half the computers barely worked. But she liked it. For the first time in years, nobody cared about her last name. Nobody cared who her grandfather was. Nobody expected special treatment. She was simply Emily. And surprisingly, that felt good. One afternoon, her manager handed her a stack of problem properties. Buildings nobody wanted to deal with. Tenants behind on rent. Maintenance issues. Paperwork disasters. The kind of assignments people usually avoided. Emily accepted them without complaint. She threw herself into the work, day after day, week after week. Slowly, things improved. Properties stabilized. Tenants stayed longer. Revenue increased. The company noticed. For the first time since the betrayal, she felt herself moving forward, not healed, Not completely, but moving. Then the wedding day arrived, and despite her best efforts, she couldn't escape it. Social media was flooded with photographs. Family members posted pictures. Relatives shared updates. Friends uploaded videos. The wedding looked expensive. Very expensive. The venue alone probably cost more than most people earned in a year. Fresh flowers everywhere. Luxury decorations. Designer clothing. Professional photographers. A perfect event. At least on the surface. Emily scrolled through several pictures before putting her phone away. She wasn't jealous. That surprised her. Months earlier she probably would have been. Now she mostly felt detached. As though she were looking at strangers. Later that evening her grandfather called. "Boosie? Not really. Come have dinner." Emily smiled. "You hate cooking." Exactly. She laughed for the first time all day. An hour later she arrived at William's house carrying takeout. The old man answered the door wearing jeans and a faded college sweatshirt. One of the richest men in the state, dressed like a retired teacher. William had always found that funny. The two ate dinner on the back porch overlooking the lake. The sun slowly disappeared behind the trees. Neither mentioned the wedding. Not initially. Eventually William broke the silence. "So," Emily groaned. "There it is. There it is." William nodded. "How are you doing?" The question was simple, but sincere. Emily appreciated that. Most people weren't actually asking anymore. They expected her to be over it. To move on, to pretend everything was fine. William never did that. He preferred truth, even when it was uncomfortable. "I'm okay." William raised an eyebrow. Emily laughed. "Mostly okay." "Better." The old man leaned back in his chair. "You know something?" "What?" "The people who hurt us usually don't determine how our story ends." Emily looked toward the lake. The water reflected the fading sunset. Orange. Gold shimmering light dancing across the surface. "It doesn't feel like that." "I know." William nodded. "That's because you're still in the middle of the story." The words stayed with her, long after dinner ended. Long after she drove home. Long after she climbed into bed. You're still in the middle of the story. At the time, she thought he was talking about heartbreak. Years later she would realize he meant something much larger. Because while Emily was slowly rebuilding her life, Olivia and Daniel were building theirs too. Or at least trying to. They purchased a large house shortly after the wedding. Bigger than they could comfortably afford. Nicer than they actually needed. The kind of house purchased by people trying to impress others. Not themselves. The mortgage payments were enormous. The maintenance costs were worse. But appearances mattered, especially to Olivia. She wanted people to see success, even if success was financed. Meanwhile, Daniel accepted a new position at a development company. The salary looked impressive. The title sounded important. Everything appeared perfect. At family gatherings, they arrived in expensive cars, wore expensive clothes, talked about expensive vacations, and for a while, people believed it. The image worked. The illusion held. But William wasn't fooled. He rarely was. One Sunday afternoon, nearly a year after the wedding, the entire family gathered at his house for lunch. Emily arrived early to help. As she carried dishes into the dining room, she overheard voices coming from William's office. Olivia, Daniel, and William. The door wasn't fully closed. Emily wasn't trying to listen. But certain words caught her attention. Expanding the companios. Daniel's voice. Future leadership. Olivia. Then William. Calm. Steady. Leadership isn't something you inherit. Silence. Then Olivia laughed nervously. We just mean someday. William didn't answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded thoughtful. Dangerous thing, assuming the future belongs to you. The conversation ended moments later. When Olivia emerged from the office, she looked frustrated. Daniel looked worse. William appeared completely unaffected. Emily never asked what happened. But she noticed something. For the remainder of lunch, Olivia seemed unusually determined to impress her grandfather. More compliments, more attention, more effort, almost like she was campaigning for something. And perhaps she was. Because over the following years, one pattern became impossible to ignore. Every time William's wealth entered a conversation, Olivia became interested. Every time business discussions occurred, Olivia appeared. Every time inheritance rumors surfaced, she somehow knew about them first. The behavior was subtle enough that most people ignored it. William didn't. Emily didn't. And whether Olivia realized it or not, someone was paying very close attention. Watching. Evaluating. Remembering. The same way William always did, because while everyone else focused on money, properties, and future inheritances, William was focused on something else entirely. Character. And unlike money, character couldn't be faked forever. For a long time, Emily measured her life in two parts. Before the betrayal, and after it. Everything seemed divided by that moment. The woman she used to be. The woman she became. The dreams she lost. The future she never expected. For nearly a year after Daniel and Olivia got married, Emily felt like she was living someone else's life. Every plan she had made was gone. Every expectation had disappeared. And yet something unexpected happened. The world didn't end. That realization surprised her. At first, every morning felt difficult. She would wake up and immediately remember. Remember what happened. Remember what she lost. Remember the future that had been taken from her. Then one morning she woke up and didn't think about Daniel for several minutes. The next month it became several hours. Eventually entire days passed. Not because she forgot. Because she stopped carrying the pain everywhere she went. Healing wasn't dramatic. It wasn't some magical moment where everything suddenly became okay. It happened quietly. One ordinary day at a time. Work helped. The small property management company continued growing. The owner, a practical woman named Susan Parker, quickly realized Emily had talents most employees didn't. She noticed details, solved problems, built relationships. Most importantly, she stayed calm when situations became difficult. Within 2 years, Evelyn was managing nearly half the company's portfolio. Within 3, she was helping make major business decisions. One afternoon, Susan called her into the office. Emily assumed something was wrong. Instead, Susan handed her a folder. "What's this?" "A proposal." Emily opened it, then stared, then looked up again. "I don't understand." Susan smiled. "Sure you do." Inside the folder was an offer. Partnership, not a promotion, not a raise. Part ownership. Emily looked back at the documents, convinced she had misunderstood something. "Susan, you've earned it." The words hit harder than expected, because nobody had ever handed her anything before. Not really. People assumed her opportunities came from being William Carter's granddaughter. They didn't see the work, the long hours, the sacrifices, the effort. Susan did, and that mattered. A lot. 3 months later, Emily officially became a partner. The celebration was small. Just dinner with a few coworkers. Nothing extravagant, nothing flashy, and somehow that made it feel more meaningful, because everything she achieved belonged entirely to her. No family connections, no inheritance, no favors, just work. For the first time since the betrayal, she felt genuinely proud, not because of what she owned, because of what she built. Meanwhile, Olivia's life seemed perfect, at least from a distance. Social media certainly suggested that. Vacation photographs, expensive restaurants, luxury purchases, designer handbags, new furniture, new cars, new everything. Every post looked like an advertisement for success. The kind of life people envied. The kind of life people assumed must be perfect. William often joked that social media was where people went to lie professionally. The older Emily became, the more she understood what he meant, because reality was usually much messier. The first cracks appeared during a family dinner. Nothing dramatic. Just a moment. A tiny moment. the kind most people wouldn't notice. Daniel arrived nearly 40 minutes late. When he walked into the room, Olivia immediately started criticizing him. Not loudly. Not enough to cause a scene, but enough. The comments kept coming. Small jabs. Passive-aggressive remarks. Sharp little observations disguised as jokes. Daniel absorbed them silently. The entire evening felt uncomfortable. Driving home later, Emily found herself thinking about it. Not because she cared about their marriage. She didn't. But because something seemed different. The image they presented to the world didn't match reality anymore. Maybe it never had. Over the next year, the pattern continued. Family events. Holiday gatherings. Birthday celebrations. The tension became impossible to ignore. Olivia seemed constantly frustrated. Daniel seemed constantly exhausted. Both appeared irritated by everything, especially each other. Yet whenever photographs appeared, they transformed instantly. Perfect smiles. Perfect couple. Perfect life. The performance fascinated Emily. It also reminded her why she no longer wanted that life. One evening, William invited her to dinner. Nothing unusual. The two had become closer over the years. After the betrayal, Emily spent more time with him than anyone else in the family. Not intentionally. It simply happened. They enjoyed each other's company. Dinner ended. Coffee followed. Then William surprised her. Want to see something? Emily laughed. That sounds dangerous. It probably is. The old man disappeared into his office. Several minutes later, he returned carrying a dusty box. What is it? History. William placed the box on the table. Inside were old photographs, newspaper clippings, business records, letters, memories, decades of memories. Emily spent nearly 2 hours looking through everything. The photographs fascinated her most. Images from the earliest days of the company. Back when William owned a single truck. Back when he handled repairs himself. Back when success wasn't guaranteed. At one point, she found a photograph of her grandfather standing beside a half-finished building. His clothes were dirty, his boots covered in mud. He looked exhausted, but happy. Very happy. Emily smiled. I've never seen this one. William glanced at the picture. I remember that day. What happened? I thought the company was going bankrupt. Emily blinked. What? William laughed. Exactly. She stared at him. You looked happy. I was. That made no sense. William took the photograph, studied it for a moment, then handed it back. Because everything I had belonged to me. Emily frowned. I don't understand. I wasn't rich. He shrugged. I wasn't successful. Another shrug. But everything I had, I earned. The old man leaned back in his chair. Nobody can take that away. The words stayed with her. Because they explained something she had been struggling to understand. Why she felt happier now than she had during her relationship with Daniel. Objectively, her life should have been worse. She had less money, less certainty, less security, yet she felt better. Because the life she had now belonged to her. Not a boyfriend, not her family, not anyone else. Her. The realization brought an unexpected sense of peace. A few weeks later, another family gathering took place at William's house. By then, Emily had learned to tolerate Olivia and Daniel. Not forgive, not forget, tolerate. There was a difference. The afternoon began normally. Food, conversation, laughter. Then a discussion about business started, and everything changed. One of William's longtime friends asked a simple question. What happens when you finally retire? William smiled. Depends. Depends on what? William sipped his coffee. Who earns it? The answer seemed harmless. Most people moved on immediately. Not Olivia. Emily noticed her reaction instantly. The smile, the sudden attention, the way she leaned forward. Interested, focused, as if every word mattered. The conversation shifted elsewhere. But Olivia remained unusually quiet, watching, thinking, calculating. The same expression Emily had seen countless times over the years. Later that evening, after most guests left, Emily helped clean up. While carrying dishes into the kitchen, she passed William's study. The door stood slightly open. Inside, Olivia was talking to him. Just thinking about the future. William nodded. And? I think family should continue leading the company. The old man remained silent. Olivia continued. That's what you've always wanted. William's expression never changed. Have I? The confidence vanished from Olivia's face. Only briefly. But Emily saw it. For the first time, her sister looked uncertain. The conversation ended shortly afterward. Olivia emerged from the study looking frustrated. William emerged looking thoughtful. Very thoughtful. That night, after everyone left, Emily sat on her porch watching the sunset. The air was cool. The neighborhood quiet. For the first time in years, she felt completely at peace. Her life wasn't perfect. It never would be. Nobody's was. But it was hers. And somewhere across town, Olivia was still chasing something. Still trying to win a race nobody else seemed to be running. Still convinced happiness was waiting somewhere in the future. Meanwhile, Emily had discovered something her sister hadn't. Sometimes the best thing that can happen to you is losing the life you thought you wanted. Because it forces you to build the life you were actually meant to have. And, while Emily couldn't see it yet, the choices she was making during those quiet years were slowly separating her future from Olivia's. One sister was building a life. The other was building an image. And eventually, that difference would matter more than anyone imagined. By the time William Carter reached his late 70s, people made a dangerous mistake around him. They assumed he had slowed down. It happened to a lot of older people. Family members stopped paying attention to them. Stopped being careful around them. Stopped treating them as if they noticed things. William found that amusing. Because the truth was exactly the opposite. The older he became, the more he noticed. He no longer wasted time on appearances. He no longer cared about excuses. He watched actions. Actions told the truth. And over the years he had watched both of his granddaughters very carefully. Not because he was judging them. Because he loved them. At least that's what he told himself. The reality was more complicated. Love didn't prevent disappointment. Sometimes it made disappointment worse. One autumn afternoon, William sat in his office reviewing quarterly reports when his assistant entered carrying a folder. These need your signature. William accepted the documents. The folder contained information about one of the company's newest development projects. A large commercial property on the edge of the city. One of the most valuable projects they had undertaken in years. As he reviewed the numbers, he noticed another name attached to the paperwork. Daniel Reed. William frowned. Not because Daniel worked with the project. Because Daniel wasn't supposed to be involved. The company he worked for represented a competing development group. Nothing improper had happened. At least not officially. But William didn't like coincidences. Especially expensive coincidences. He made a note to investigate later. Then continued working. That evening the entire situation slipped from his mind, until Olivia called. Grandpa? William smiled. Olivia rarely called unless she wanted something. That wasn't entirely her fault. Some people learned early that charm opened doors. Olivia had spent her whole life relying on it. Hello, Olivia. How are you? Old. She laughed. The same laugh she used whenever she wanted something. William recognized it immediately. What do you need? A pause. Then another laugh. Do I always need something? Yes. This time she laughed for real. At least he thought she did. Eventually she explained the reason for the call. Daniel wanted advice about an investment opportunity. William listened quietly, then asked several questions. The more details he heard, the less he liked it. The opportunity sounded risky, poorly researched, based more on optimism than reality. When he said so, Olivia sounded disappointed. Daniel thinks it could be huge. William leaned back in his chair. Daniel also thought having an affair with his girlfriend's sister was a good idea. Silence. The temperature of the conversation dropped instantly. Neither mentioned Emily often. The subject remained uncomfortable for everyone. Even years later. Especially years later. Because enough time had passed for people to stop talking about it. Not enough time to forget it. Olivia eventually changed the subject. But William couldn't stop thinking about something. Not the investment. The reaction. The defensiveness. Every time he questioned Daniel, Olivia rushed to protect him. Every time. It wasn't loyalty. It felt like insecurity, as though she constantly needed reassurance that she hadn't made a mistake. The realization stayed with him long after the call ended. Several weeks later, William attended a charity fundraiser. The event attracted local business owners, developers, investors, and politicians. The usual crowd. William hated these events. But they served a purpose. Relationships mattered, even when they were exhausting. Halfway through the evening, he noticed Daniel speaking with a group of developers. The younger man appeared confident, successful, comfortable. William watched from a distance. Not intentionally. The opportunity simply presented itself. Daniel didn't know he was there, which made the observation valuable. Because people behave differently when they think nobody is watching. William's favorite kind of observation. One of the developers mentioned an employee who had recently made a costly mistake. The comment seemed harmless. Nothing unusual. Then Daniel laughed. Not politely. Not kindly. Cruelly. The conversation shifted into criticism. Mockery. Dismissive comments. The kind people make when discussing someone they believe has no value. William listened quietly. The employee wasn't present. Couldn't defend himself. Couldn't respond. Daniel knew that. Yet he continued. And in that moment William learned something. Not something dramatic. Not something shocking. Something small. But important. Character revealed itself in tiny moments. Especially moments nobody expected others to notice. Later that evening Daniel spotted William and immediately transformed. The confidence became respect. The criticism disappeared. The smile appeared. The performance began. William found that interesting. Very interesting. A few days later he invited Emily to lunch. The two met at a small diner near the lake, one of William's favorite places. The food was average. The coffee was terrible. He loved it. Emily arrived carrying paperwork. Working. Always. William smiled. Good. They ordered lunch. Talked about business. Talked about life. Talked about nothing important. Then a waitress accidentally spilled coffee. Not on Emily. Near her. The poor woman immediately started apologizing. Clearly embarrassed. Clearly upset. Before William could say anything, Emily stood. It's okay. The waitress continued apologizing. Emily smiled. Nobody died. The woman laughed nervously. The tension disappeared. Problem solved. The conversation resumed. Simple. Ordinary, forgettable. Except William didn't forget. Because he noticed something. Emily's first reaction wasn't anger, or embarrassment, or blame. It was kindness. Again, a tiny thing. A small moment. The kind most people ignored. William never ignored those moments. He collected them, stored them away, examined them over time. Because character wasn't revealed during major events. Character appeared during ordinary ones. Several months later another opportunity arrived. This time involving Olivia. William had been hospitalized overnight for observation after experiencing chest discomfort. Nothing serious. At least according to the doctors. But the family became concerned. Messages arrived constantly. Phone calls. Flowers. Visitors. Everyone wanted updates. Olivia arrived the following afternoon, carrying gifts, carrying flowers, carrying enough attention to fill the entire hospital. For nearly an hour she sat beside his bed discussing doctors, treatments, and recovery plans. Then she checked her watch. Twice, then 3 times. Then her phone. William noticed. Of course he noticed. Finally she stood. I need to go. Work. Olivia hesitated. No. William already knew: a social event, a dinner, something more important, or at least more enjoyable. The old man smiled. Have fun. Relief crossed her face. Actual relief. And suddenly William understood something. Olivia cared. But only until caring became inconvenient. That realization saddened him. Not because she left. Because he genuinely believed she didn't understand herself. Several hours later, Emily arrived. Straight from work. Still carrying paperwork. Still wearing business clothes. She stayed until visiting hours ended. Not talking much. Not making a performance out of it. Just staying. Years earlier, William had shown her an old photograph. Told her she was the kind of person who stayed. The years since then had only confirmed it. One granddaughter visited when it was easy. The other visited when it was necessary. The distinction mattered. A lot. As months became years, William continued watching, observing, learning. The picture grew clearer. Olivia always seemed focused on the future. The next promotion. The next purchase. The next opportunity. The next advantage. Nothing was ever enough. Meanwhile, Emily focused on the present. The people around her. The work in front of her. The responsibilities she had already been given. One granddaughter chased success. The other quietly built it. And slowly, without telling anyone, William began making decisions. Important decisions. Permanent decisions. Not based on love. He loved them both. Not based on money. He had more than enough of that. Based on trust. Because one day everything he built would belong to someone else. And when that day came, he needed absolute certainty. The future of the Carter legacy couldn't depend on who wanted it most. It had to depend on who deserved it. Even if nobody saw that coming. Especially if nobody saw it coming. By the 5th year of Olivia and Daniel's marriage, they had become experts at looking successful. From the outside, their life appeared perfect. The photographs suggested perfection. The vacations suggested perfection. The house suggested perfection. Even the car parked in the driveway suggested perfection. Everything looked exactly the way Olivia had always imagined it would. The problem was that appearances don't pay bills. Reality does. And reality was becoming increasingly expensive. The house alone cost more than most people would willingly admit. When Olivia first saw it, she fell in love instantly. 5 bedrooms. A grand staircase. Floor to ceiling windows overlooking a private golf course. The kind of property designed to impress visitors before they even entered the front door. Daniel had hesitated. Not because he disliked the house. Because he understood numbers. At least better than Olivia did. The monthly payments were enormous. Property taxes were worse. Maintenance costs never seemed to end. But Olivia wanted it. And Daniel had spent years trying to prove that marrying her had been the right decision. So they bought it. For a while, things worked. Daniel's income covered most expenses. Olivia continued consulting for various real estate projects. Money flowed in. Money flowed out. Life continued. Then the economy slowed. Nothing dramatic. Nothing catastrophic. Just enough to create problems. Several projects were delayed. Investments produced smaller returns. Business became less predictable. The first warning signs appeared quietly. A canceled vacation. A postponed renovation. An unusually tense conversation about finances. Tiny things. The kind couples usually overcome. Except Olivia and Daniel weren't most couples. Because neither of them handled disappointment particularly well. Especially Olivia. She had spent her entire life believing success was something visible. A larger house. A nicer car. A bigger paycheck. More status. More recognition. More everything. The idea of taking a step backward felt unbearable. So instead of reducing expenses, they maintained them. The expensive dinners continued. The luxury purchases continued. The image remained intact. Behind the scenes, however, the pressure kept growing. One Sunday afternoon, the entire Carter family gathered for William's birthday. The event took place at the lake house as usual. Emily arrived early to help with preparations. Several hours later, Olivia and Daniel arrived. 20 minutes late. Again, William pretended not to notice. Most people pretended not to notice. Emily noticed, mostly because they looked exhausted, not physically, emotionally. Daniel seemed distracted. Olivia seemed irritated. The tension between them filled every room they entered. Throughout lunch, they barely spoke to each other. When they did, the conversations felt forced, carefully controlled, artificial. At one point, Daniel accidentally spilled a drink. A minor mistake, something that should have taken 5 seconds to resolve. Instead, Olivia immediately snapped at him. The comment was brief, sharp, embarrassing. The entire table went quiet. Daniel apologized. Not because he spilled the drink, because he had clearly learned that apologizing ended arguments faster. William watched the interaction without saying a word. Emily noticed that too. Her grandfather rarely intervened. He preferred observing. People revealed far more when left alone. Later that afternoon, Emily stepped outside for some fresh air. The lake shimmered beneath the summer sun. Children played near the water. Laughter echoed across the property. For a few moments, everything felt peaceful. Then voices drifted from around the side of the house. Olivia and Daniel, arguing. Emily wasn't trying to listen. The conversation simply carried across the yard. You promised things would get better. Daniel's voice. Frustrated. Tired. They will. Olivia sounded defensive. You've been saying that for 2 years. Silence. Then Daniel spoke again. We can't keep spending money like this. Olivia immediately lowered her voice, but not before Emily heard enough. Enough to understand. Enough to see another crack forming beneath the surface. Emily quietly walked away. The conversation wasn't her business. Neither was their marriage. She had learned that lesson years ago. Still, she couldn't stop thinking about it, because the argument revealed something important. The perfect life wasn't perfect. Not even close. Several weeks later, Emily met William for lunch. The old man seemed unusually thoughtful. Distracted, as though something occupied his mind. Halfway through the meal, he asked an unexpected question. What do you think success is? Emily laughed. That's random. Answer anyway. She considered it. Then shrugged. Freedom. William smiled. Interesting. What would your answer be? The old man leaned back. Peace. Emily nodded slowly. The answer made sense. More sense than money. More sense than status. Peace. The ability to sleep at night. The ability to look at yourself honestly. The ability to live without pretending. As lunch continued, William asked another question. Do you think people change? Emily thought about Olivia. About Daniel. About herself. Sometimes. Sometimes. Most people become more of who they already are. William smiled. A real smile. The kind that appeared when someone said something he genuinely agreed with. Exactly. The conversation moved on, but the questions lingered, because whether Emily realized it or not, William was still evaluating, still measuring, still learning. Not about business, about people. Back at the Carter Company, rumors had started circulating. Nothing official, nothing public, just whispers. Questions about succession. Questions about retirement. Questions about the future. William was getting older. Everyone knew it. Naturally, people wondered what happened next. Who would eventually lead the company? Who would control the empire? Who would inherit responsibility for everything William built? The questions spread quietly, and eventually they reached Olivia. The effect was immediate. Suddenly she became far more interested in company affairs. She attended events she normally ignored, scheduled lunches with executives, asked questions about operations, asked questions about expansion plans, asked questions about future leadership. The effort was obvious, at least to anyone paying attention. William noticed. Of course he noticed. One evening Olivia invited him to dinner. An unusual gesture. She rarely initiated private dinners. William accepted anyway. Curiosity won. The meal began pleasantly enough. Small talk. family updates, stories. Then the conversation shifted, predictably, toward business. Olivia spoke about legacy, responsibility, keeping the company in family hands. William listened, occasionally nodding, occasionally asking questions. Then Olivia made a mistake, a small one, the kind most people wouldn't notice. We both know what makes the most sense. William looked up. What does? The future. There it was. The assumption, the entitlement, the certainty. As though the decision had already been made. As though she merely needed confirmation. William sipped his coffee, then asked a simple question. What makes you think the future belongs to you? For the first time all evening, Olivia looked uncomfortable. The answer never came, because she didn't actually have one. Not beyond wanting it, and wanting something wasn't the same as earning it. The dinner ended shortly afterward. Driving home, William found himself thinking about Emily. Not because she was perfect. She wasn't. Nobody was. But whenever Emily discussed success, she talked about responsibility. Whenever Olivia discussed success, she talked about ownership. The difference seemed small. It wasn't. One focused on what she could contribute. The other focused on what she could receive. And every year that difference became more obvious. Across town, Olivia stood in the grand foyer of the house she had always wanted. The house that impressed everyone. The house that represented success. The house that was slowly becoming a burden. She stared at the staircase. The expensive artwork. The luxury furniture. Everything looked exactly the way she had imagined. Yet somehow it never felt like enough. There was always another goal, another upgrade, another thing she wanted, another race she needed to win. And although she couldn't see it yet, that constant hunger was pushing her toward a mistake that would eventually cost her far more than money. Because while Olivia spent her life trying to look successful, William was quietly deciding who truly was. The opportunity arrived on a rainy Tuesday morning. At least that's what Olivia called it. An opportunity. Daniel called it something else. A risk. And over the years, Daniel had learned that when he and Olivia disagreed, the argument usually lasted until someone gave in. Most of the time that someone was him. The phone call came just after breakfast. Olivia listened for nearly 20 minutes. Nodding, smiling, taking notes. By the time she hung up, excitement practically radiated from her. Daniel immediately recognized the look. It was the same expression she wore whenever she thought she had found a shortcut to something bigger. What is it? Olivia sat down across from him. A development opportunity. Daniel sighed. Another one. This one's different. Olivia ignored the comment. A folder appeared on the table. Charts, projections, property information, numbers, lots of numbers. Daniel reviewed everything carefully. The further he read, the less he liked it. The project involved a large parcel of undeveloped land outside the city. Investors were being promised enormous returns. The projections seemed optimistic. Very optimistic. Dangerously optimistic. Daniel closed the folder. I don't like it. Olivia crossed her arms. Why? Because these numbers assume everything goes perfectly. So, Daniel stared at her. So nothing goes perfectly. The conversation continued for nearly an hour. Neither changed their position. Olivia saw potential. Daniel saw risk. By lunchtime, frustration had replaced discussion. By dinner, they weren't speaking at all. It wasn't really about the investment. Not entirely. The argument touched something deeper. Something that had been growing between them for years. Fear. Not fear of failure. Fear of falling behind. Olivia hated feeling behind. The feeling followed her everywhere. When friends bought larger homes. When coworkers received promotions. When family members achieved something. Every success became a comparison. Every comparison became a competition. And every competition created another reason to be dissatisfied. The cycle never ended. Several days later, Olivia visited William. She arrived carrying coffee and pastries, a gesture that might have seemed thoughtful to someone who didn't know her. William knew her. He accepted the coffee anyway. The two sat on the porch overlooking the lake. The morning air was cool, the water perfectly still. For a while, they discussed ordinary things. Weather, family, local news. Then Olivia finally mentioned the investment. William listened carefully, asked questions, reviewed numbers. The longer he looked, the more concerned he became. The proposal wasn't fraudulent. It wasn't illegal. It simply relied on assumptions. Too many assumptions. The foundation looked weak, and weak foundations eventually collapse. When he explained his concerns, Olivia became visibly frustrated. You always focus on what could go wrong. William smiled. That's why I've stayed in business for 50 years. Olivia laughed politely, but he could tell she wasn't listening. Not really. She wanted validation, not advice. There was a difference, a significant difference. Eventually she gathered her paperwork. I think you're being too cautious. William nodded. That's possible. The answer seemed to surprise her. She expected an argument. Instead, he simply smiled. As Olivia drove away, William watched her car disappear down the long driveway. Then he shook his head, not angrily, sadly, because he recognized something. Olivia didn't actually want guidance. She wanted confirmation. And people who only listen to opinions they already agree with usually learn expensive lessons. Across town, Emily was dealing with a completely different problem. One of the company's largest clients had unexpectedly decided to sell several commercial properties. The transaction would affect dozens of tenants, hundreds of employees, and a significant portion of the company's revenue. Everyone at the office was stressed. Everyone except Emily. Not because she wasn't concerned. Because panic never solved anything. She spent 3 days meeting with tenants, reviewing contracts, negotiating terms, finding solutions. The process wasn't glamorous. Nobody would write articles about it. Nobody would celebrate it. But by the end of the week, the crisis had been contained. The company survived. The tenants remained protected. The employees kept their jobs. Problem solved. Late Friday afternoon, Susan entered Emily's office. You know what I like about you? Emily looked up. I'm almost afraid to ask. Susan laughed. You solve problems. That's literally my job. No. Susan shook her head. Most people look for someone to blame. She leaned against the doorway. You look for solutions. After she left, Emily found herself thinking about the comment. Not because it was flattering. Because it reminded her of William. The same practical mindset. The same focus. Find the problem. Fix the problem. Move forward. No drama. No performance. Just work. That evening she drove to the lake house for dinner. William was already outside when she arrived, watching the sunset. One of his favorite activities. The two sat quietly for several minutes. Comfortable silence. The kind only possible between people who genuinely enjoy each other's company. Eventually William spoke. You know what's interesting? Emily smiled. That usually means you're about to teach me something. Probably. The old man pointed toward the lake. Several fishermen were preparing their boats. They all want the same thing. Fish. William laughed. Success. Emily nodded. Fair enough. And yet most of them will spend the entire day focusing on different things. She waited. Some focus on patience. Okay. Some focus on skill. Another nod. Some focus on luck. Emily smiled. I feel like there's a point coming. There is. William leaned back. The people who rely on luck usually struggle the most. The words seemed simple, but they stayed with her. Because she immediately thought about Olivia. Not intentionally. The comparison simply appeared. One sister believed success came from effort. The other often acted like success was something you captured. Something you acquired. Something you inherited. The distinction mattered. Even if neither fully understood why. A month later, News about Olivia's investment began spreading through the family. She had invested heavily, much more heavily than Daniel wanted. The amount surprised everyone, including William. Not because she lacked confidence, because she lacked caution. The project represented a significant portion of her savings. A gamble, a very large gamble. When Emily heard about it, she felt a flicker of concern. Despite everything, she didn't want her sister to fail. She didn't want anyone to fail, especially not family. But there wasn't much she could do. People make their own choices. People live with their own consequences. That's how life works. Weeks became months. Construction began. Investors celebrated. Optimism spread. At first, everything seemed promising. Exactly the way Olivia predicted. Exactly the way William feared. Because some mistakes don't reveal themselves immediately. They wait. Quietly, patiently. Growing beneath the surface. Like cracks in a foundation. Invisible at first. Obvious later. And while Olivia spent her days imagining the fortune she was about to make, William found himself paying attention to something else entirely. Not the investment. Not the numbers. Not the potential profits. The reactions. The decisions. The character being revealed along the way. Because money had a strange effect on people. It amplified who they already were. And every year, William became more convinced of something. The future of the Carter legacy wouldn't be determined by who wanted wealth the most. It would be determined by who understood its responsibility. A lesson one granddaughter was learning, and the other was still determined to avoid. For almost a year, Olivia believed she had been right. The investment looked brilliant. Construction moved forward. Investors were optimistic. The value of the land appeared to be increasing. Every update sounded positive. Every report suggested success. And Olivia made sure everyone knew it. Family dinners became exhausting. Almost every conversation somehow found its way back to the project. If someone mentioned real estate, Olivia talked about the development. If someone mentioned business, Olivia talked about the development. If someone mentioned the weather, she could probably find a way to connect it to the development. At first, people listened politely. Then they started avoiding the topic. Eventually, they started avoiding Olivia altogether. Not because they disliked her, because nobody enjoys being trapped in someone else's sales presentation. The only person who seemed less enthusiastic than everyone else was Daniel. Emily noticed it during a 4th of July gathering at William's lake house. The family had gathered near the water. Children ran through the yard. Music drifted from portable speakers. The smell of grilled food filled the air. Everything looked normal. But Daniel looked miserable. Whenever Olivia talked about the investment, he became quieter. Whenever someone praised the project, he forced a smile. Whenever someone asked questions, he changed the subject. It wasn't subtle, at least not to Emily or William. The old man noticed everything. Later that afternoon, while helping William carry folding chairs back into storage, Emily finally mentioned it. Daniel seemed stressed. William nodded. He is. You know something. I know enough. That answer wasn't unusual. William rarely explained his observations. He preferred letting people discover things themselves. Emily followed him into the storage building. What aren't you telling me? William smiled. A dangerous question. Why? Because the answer is usually more than people want to hear. Emily laughed. That's not an answer. No. William set down a chair. It isn't. The conversation ended there, but the comment stayed with her. Because she had heard that tone before. William knew something. Maybe not specifics, but something. Several weeks later, the first problem surfaced. A major contractor unexpectedly withdrew from the project. Officially, the company cited scheduling conflicts. Unofficially, rumors suggested something else. Cost overruns. Delays. Budget concerns. Nobody seemed to know the full story, but one thing became clear. The project wasn't progressing as smoothly as investors had been led to believe. Olivia dismissed the concerns immediately. Every project has challenges. She repeated the phrase constantly. To family, to friends, to Daniel, mostly to herself. The problem wasn't the setback. The problem was her reaction. Because instead of addressing concerns, she ignored them. Instead of asking difficult questions, she avoided them. Instead of preparing for problems, she assumed everything would somehow work out. Daniel reacted differently. He started asking questions. Lots of questions. Questions nobody seemed eager to answer. Questions about budgets. Questions about timelines. Questions about financing. Questions about decisions that suddenly seemed less logical than they once had. The answers rarely satisfied him. As a result, the tension at home worsened. One evening, the argument became impossible to ignore. The couple hosted a dinner party. Several friends attended. Everything appeared normal, until it wasn't. The disagreement started in the kitchen, quietly. Then voices rose. Not enough for guests to hear clearly. Enough for them to notice. The room grew uncomfortable. Conversation slowed. People exchanged glances. The evening ended earlier than planned. The following morning, Olivia posted smiling photographs online. Happy couple. Wonderful evening. Perfect life. The contrast would have been funny if it wasn't so sad. Around the same time, Emily experienced a completely different kind of success. The company continued expanding. New clients arrived. Revenue increased. Additional employees were hired. Susan gradually shifted more responsibility onto Emily. Not because she had to, because she trusted her. Trust. The word seemed important. More important than money. More important than titles. People spent years chasing wealth, yet the most valuable thing anyone could earn was trust. One afternoon, Susan proved it. The company received an offer to purchase one of their largest managed portfolios. The decision would affect the entire organization. When the meeting began, everyone expected Susan to make the final call. Instead, she turned toward Emily. What do you think? The room fell silent. Several executives looked surprised. Emily was younger than most of them, less experienced than some. Yet Susan wanted her opinion first. Not because she knew everything, because she had earned trust. The realization stayed with Emily long after the meeting ended. Later that week, she visited William. The old man was sitting on the dock watching the water, one of his favorite places. Emily joined him. For several minutes, neither spoke. Then William broke the silence. You look happy. Emily smiled. I think I am. I know. The old man nodded. You've stopped looking backward. The comment caught her off guard. Because it was true. Years earlier, every conversation somehow returned to Olivia, or Daniel, or the betrayal. Now entire weeks passed without either crossing her mind. Not because she forgave them, because she moved beyond them. There was a difference. A significant difference. William seemed pleased by that. Very pleased. As the sun began setting, he asked another unexpected question. If someone handed you everything tomorrow, would you want it? Emily frowned. What does that mean? Everything. He gestured vaguely. The money? The business? The responsibility? Emily laughed. That's a terrifying thought. Why? Because it's a lot. William smiled. Exactly. Most people would have answered differently. Most people would have talked about opportunity, or wealth, or power. Emily talked about responsibility. William noticed. Of course he noticed. Later that night, after Emily left, William remained on the dock long after darkness arrived, thinking, evaluating, remembering. Because he wasn't just observing his family anymore. He was making decisions. Permanent decisions. The kind that couldn't be undone. Across town, Olivia sat at her kitchen table staring at financial reports. The optimism of the previous year was fading. Slowly. Painfully. The numbers weren't disastrous. Not yet. But they weren't encouraging either. Delays continued. Costs increased. Returns decreased. Every update seemed slightly worse than the last. Daniel sat across from her, reading the same reports. Neither spoke for several minutes. Finally, he broke the silence. "We should prepare ourselves." Olivia looked up. "For what?" Daniel hesitated, then said the words she didn't want to hear. "This might not work." The reaction was immediate. Olivia stood so quickly her chair nearly tipped over. "Don't. Olivia. Don't say that." Daniel rubbed his forehead. "I'm being realistic." "No." She shook her head. "You're giving up." The argument continued late into the night. Neither convinced the other. Neither changed position. Because the real disagreement wasn't about the investment anymore. It was about identity. Daniel was beginning to accept reality. Olivia was still fighting it. And somewhere beneath the arguments, beneath the financial stress, beneath the carefully maintained image of success, something important was happening. The foundation was cracking. Not just beneath the investment, beneath the marriage, beneath the life they had built, beneath the future Olivia had always assumed would belong to her. The cracks were still small, still easy to ignore, but they were growing. And as William Carter often said, once a foundation begins to fail, the collapse is only a matter of time. The project officially collapsed 9 months later, not all at once, not with a dramatic announcement, not with flashing headlines or emergency meetings. The collapse happened the way most disasters happen. Slowly, then suddenly. For months, investors received updates filled with optimistic language, minor delays, unexpected adjustments, temporary challenges, carefully chosen words designed to sound reassuring. Then the truth became impossible to hide. Construction stopped. Funding disappeared. Lawsuits emerged. Partners began distancing themselves. The numbers no longer worked. The promises could no longer be supported. And overnight, millions of dollars vanished. Olivia wasn't the only person who lost money. Dozens of investors were affected. Some lost savings. Some lost retirement funds. Some lost far more than they could comfortably afford. But for Olivia, the financial loss wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what came afterward. The embarrassment. Because failure is painful. Public failure is worse. For years she had talked about the project. Promoted it. Defended it. Used it as proof that she was smarter than everyone else. Now people remembered those conversations. Now people remembered the confidence. Now people remembered the predictions. And suddenly those memories felt very different. The first family gathering after the collapse was uncomfortable. Nobody mentioned the investment directly. Nobody needed to. The subject sat in the room anyway. Invisible. Heavy. Present. Olivia arrived late. Daniel barely spoke. Several relatives avoided eye contact. Others overcompensated by acting unusually friendly. The entire afternoon felt awkward. Emily mostly kept to herself, not because she wanted to punish Olivia, because she genuinely didn't know what to say. What could she say? "I told you so." That wasn't true. She never warned Olivia. Good luck? That felt ridiculous. Eventually, she settled on kindness. Simple kindness. The same thing she would offer anyone going through a difficult time. Not forgiveness. Not reconciliation. Basic human decency. The gesture seemed to surprise Olivia. Maybe because she expected judgment. Maybe because she would have judged someone else. Whatever the reason, she seemed unsettled by it. William noticed that. Of course he did. The old man noticed everything, especially during difficult moments. Because difficult moments revealed character. A few weeks after the collapse, William invited both granddaughters to lunch separately. Emily first, Olivia later. The conversations couldn't have been more different. Emily arrived carrying work documents. As usual, the company continued growing. Several major contracts had recently been secured. New opportunities appeared almost monthly. Life was busy, stressful, rewarding. William enjoyed hearing about it, not because of the money, because Emily loved the work. That mattered. Passion always mattered. Halfway through lunch, William asked a question. If you could stop working tomorrow, would you? Emily laughed. Absolutely not. Why? The answer came immediately. Because I'd be bored, William smiled. The response pleased him. Not because it was correct, because it was honest. The next day, Olivia arrived. The difference was noticeable immediately. She looked tired. The previous year had taken a toll. Stress showed in her face, in her posture, in her voice. The confidence that once seemed endless now appeared fragile. The lunch conversation remained pleasant, at first. Then Olivia eventually brought up money, not directly. Indirectly, through concerns, frustrations, future plans. William listened patiently, then asked a simple question. If you had enough money tomorrow, what would you do? Olivia blinked. The answer came just as quickly as Emily's. Whatever I wanted. William nodded. But internally, something settled into place. Not because the answer was wrong, because it revealed priorities. One granddaughter viewed work as purpose. The other viewed money as freedom. Neither perspective was unusual. Yet the distinction mattered, more than either realized. As autumn arrived, additional problems surfaced inside Olivia and Daniel's marriage. Financial stress amplified everything. Small disagreements became large arguments. Minor frustrations became major conflicts. Resentments that had remained hidden for years suddenly appeared. One evening, Daniel came home to discover Olivia reviewing household expenses. Stacks of paperwork covered the dining room table. Credit card statements, mortgage documents, investment reports. The reality neither wanted to confront. Daniel sat down. We need to sell the house. The reaction was immediate. No. Olivia, no. Daniel took a deep breath. We can't afford this anymore. We can't. The argument lasted nearly 3 hours. Neither changed position. Neither listened. Because they weren't discussing a house. They were discussing identity. To Daniel, the house had become a burden. To Olivia, selling it felt like admitting failure. And failure was something she feared more than almost anything. Eventually, Daniel left the room, the conversation unresolved, like so many others. The following week, William received an unexpected visit. One of the company's longtime executives stopped by the lake house. The two men had worked together for decades. The conversation eventually shifted toward succession, something that happened more frequently these days. William's age made the topic unavoidable. What happens when you retire? William smiled. Everyone keeps asking that, because everyone wants to know. The executive laughed. Especially your family. William didn't respond immediately. Instead, he looked out across the lake. The water reflected the afternoon sunlight. Calm, steady, predictable, unlike people. People were rarely predictable. Finally, William spoke. Most people think leadership is a reward. His friend nodded. And it's not. The old man turned back toward him. It's a responsibility. The distinction seemed obvious. Yet William knew most people never understood it, including some members of his own family. As winter approached, Emily received another promotion. Technically, it wasn't a promotion. The company restructured ownership percentages. Her share increased substantially. The change came with more responsibility, more pressure, more expectations. She accepted all of it without hesitation, because responsibility never frightened her. That fact mattered more than she knew. One snowy evening she visited William. The two sat beside the fireplace drinking coffee, talking about nothing important. The conversation drifted naturally. Work, family, life. Then William asked another strange question. What do you think people reveal when money is involved? Emily smiled. You're in one of your moods tonight. Answer anyway. She considered it carefully, then shrugged. Themselves. William's smile widened. Exactly. For several moments neither spoke. The fire crackled softly. Snow fell outside. The house felt peaceful, comfortable. Then William quietly added something. The interesting part is that most people never realize they're revealing anything. The comment lingered in the air. And although Emily didn't fully understand it yet, William was closer than ever to making his final decision. Years of observation, years of conversations, years of watching people when they believed nobody was paying attention. The picture had become clear. Very clear. Because money had revealed things. Success had revealed things. Failure had revealed things. And before long, the entire Carter family would discover exactly what William Carter had learned from watching them all these years. If you've been following Olivia's journey, here's something to think about. Do you believe money changes people, or does it simply reveal who they already were all along? Let me know what you think in the comments. The strange thing about family is that even when relationships break, they never completely disappear. The connection changes. Sometimes it weakens. Sometimes it becomes painful. Sometimes it turns into little more than a shared history. But it remains. No matter how much distance exists. No matter how many years pass. Emily learned that lesson during the winter after Olivia's investment collapsed. By then, nearly 7 years had passed since the betrayal. 7 years since she had walked into Daniel's apartment and discovered the truth. 7 years since the future she thought she wanted disappeared. Looking back, the pain felt different now. Smaller. Not because the betrayal mattered less. Because her life had become larger. The wound occupied less space. There were mornings when she didn't think about Olivia at all. Entire weeks passed without Daniel crossing her mind. The life she built had finally become more important than the life she lost, and that realization felt liberating. One Saturday afternoon, Emily stopped by a local bookstore after a meeting. She wandered through the aisles carrying a coffee and enjoying something she rarely had anymore. Free time. The store was quiet. Relaxing. Exactly what she needed. Then she saw Olivia. The encounter caught both of them off guard. For a moment neither moved. Neither spoke. The awkwardness was immediate. Years of history standing between them. Years of silence. Years of unresolved emotions. Finally Olivia managed a small smile. Emily. The conversation nearly ended there. It probably would have years earlier. But something had changed. Maybe age. Maybe perspective. Maybe exhaustion. Whatever the reason, neither immediately walked away. How are you? Olivia asked. The question sounded genuine. That surprised Emily. Good. Olivia nodded. I'm glad. Several seconds passed. The silence wasn't hostile. Just unfamiliar. Like two people trying to remember how to speak a language they once knew fluently. Eventually Emily asked the same question. How are you? The answer took longer. Much longer? Okay. Emily almost smiled. It was the exact answer people gave when they weren't okay. She knew because she had used it herself. Many times. Neither pushed further. After a few minutes, they said goodbye and went separate directions. The encounter lasted less than 5 minutes. Yet Emily found herself thinking about it for days. Not because anything important happened. Because of what didn't happen. There was no argument. No bitterness. No hostility. Just two sisters who no longer knew each other. The realization felt unexpectedly sad. Meanwhile, Olivia's life continued becoming more complicated. The financial losses from the failed investment hadn't destroyed her. But they changed things. The expensive lifestyle she had spent maintaining became increasingly difficult to support. The house remained a constant source of stress. Bills continued arriving. Repairs continued appearing. Expenses continued growing. Reality refused to cooperate with appearances. One evening, Daniel came home carrying a folder. Olivia recognized it immediately. Real estate paperwork. Her stomach tightened. We got an offer. She already knew what he meant. The house. The conversation they had avoided for months. Maybe years. Daniel sat across from her. We should take it. Olivia stared at the documents. The offer wasn't terrible. It wasn't great either. Most importantly, it represented something she couldn't accept: defeat. Selling the house felt like admitting everyone else had been right. Admitting she had made mistakes. Admitting the image she spent years creating wasn't real. And Olivia had spent her entire life avoiding that feeling. The discussion lasted late into the evening. Neither raised their voice. Neither became angry. That somehow made it worse. Because anger passes. Resignation doesn't. Across town, William received another concerning report from his doctor. Nothing urgent. Nothing dramatic. But enough. Enough to remind him that time wasn't unlimited. Enough to force difficult decisions. The realization didn't frighten him. William had never feared death. He feared unfinished business. And unfortunately, he still had some. Several weeks later, he invited Emily to the lake house. The invitation seemed ordinary. It wasn't. The moment she arrived, she noticed something different. William appeared tired. Not sick. Not weak. Just older. For the first time, the years seemed visible. The realization unsettled her. The two spent most of the afternoon walking around the property. One of their favorite activities. The lake was quiet. The trees bare from winter. The air cold enough to sting. At one point, they stopped near the dock. William looked out over the water. "Do you regret it?" Emily frowned. "Regret what?" "The way things happened." The question caught her off guard, because she knew exactly what he meant. Olivia, Daniel, everything. For a long time she considered the answer. Finally she spoke. "I regret the pain." William nodded. "But..." Emily smiled slightly. "But if it hadn't happened, I wouldn't have the life I have now." The old man looked pleased. Very pleased. "That's a healthy answer." Emily laughed. "You make it sound like a therapy session." "Maybe it is." For several moments they stood in silence. Then William asked another question, one that surprised her. "Do you hate her?" Emily didn't answer immediately, because years earlier the answer might have been yes. Now she wasn't sure. Eventually she shook her head. "Numb?" The word felt strange, unexpected. "True. No," she repeated. William nodded slowly, as though confirming something. As though another piece of a puzzle had fallen into place. Later that evening, after Emily left, William remained outside alone, watching the lake, thinking, remembering. Because while Emily had moved forward, Olivia remained trapped. Not trapped by finances. Not trapped by marriage. Trapped by comparison. By competition. By the constant need to prove something. And the saddest part was that she probably didn't even realize it. A few months later, the Carter family gathered for Easter. The atmosphere felt different than previous years. Quieter, more subdued. William's health had become a concern everyone silently acknowledged. Nobody discussed it openly. Nobody needed to. The signs were obvious. The family spent more time with him. Listened more carefully. Paid closer attention. During lunch, Emily found herself watching him. Watching the way he interacted with everyone. The way he listened. The way he observed. Even now, he seemed to be studying people, still learning, still evaluating, still being William. At one point she caught him looking toward Olivia. Not with anger. Not disappointment. Something else. Sadness. The expression lasted only a second. Then disappeared. But Emily saw it. And for reasons she couldn't explain, it bothered her. Because it looked like a man mourning something that hadn't happened yet. Something he wished had turned out differently. Something he knew he couldn't fix. The feeling stayed with her long after the gathering ended. And as spring slowly arrived, bringing warmer weather and longer days, William Carter finally began putting the last pieces of his plan into place. A plan nobody knew existed. A plan that had been forming quietly for years. A plan built not on money, but on lessons. Because before his story ended, William intended to teach one final lesson to the family he loved. Even if they wouldn't understand it until he was gone. The first person William called was his attorney. Not his family. Not his business partners. Not his accountant. his attorney, because some decisions require paperwork before they require conversations. The meeting took place on a quiet Monday morning, the kind of morning William had always enjoyed. No interruptions. No distractions. Just work. The attorney Richard Harrison had worked with him for more than 20 years. Long enough to understand when William was serious, and long enough to know better than to make assumptions. When William arrived carrying several folders, Richard immediately sensed something important was happening. Big day. William smiled. Potentially. The attorney motioned toward a chair. What are we working on? William sat down, then placed the folders on the desk. Estate planning. Richard nodded. Nothing unusual there. They had discussed estate planning many times before. Most wealthy families did. The unusual part was the look on William's face. A look Richard had rarely seen. Absolute certainty. The kind that appears when someone has finally reached a decision. After years of thinking, years of evaluating, years of waiting. What changed? Richard asked. William leaned back. Nothing. The answer surprised him. Nothing. I've simply seen enough. Richard didn't ask what that meant. He knew William well enough to understand. The explanation would come when William was ready. Or not at all. For the next several hours they reviewed documents, trust structures, ownership agreements, corporate succession plans, asset allocations. The conversation was detailed, complex, important. Yet beneath all the legal language existed a much simpler question. Who should inherit responsibility? Not wealth. Responsibility. That distinction mattered enormously to William. By the time the meeting ended, most of the framework was complete. Not finalized, but very close. As William prepared to leave, Richard asked one final question. Are you sure? William didn't hesitate. Yes. The certainty in his voice ended the discussion. Because Richard had learned something over the years. William Carter changed his mind frequently about small things, never about important ones. Across town, Emily spent the day dealing with a completely different challenge. One of the company's largest tenants had unexpectedly announced plans to relocate. The move threatened several contracts, several employees, several years of careful planning. Everyone seemed worried, except Emily. Not because she enjoyed the situation, because she focused on solutions, always solutions. The habit had become second nature. Instead of complaining, she made calls. Instead of assigning blame, she scheduled meetings. Instead of panicking, she got to work. 3 weeks later, the problem was resolved. Not perfectly. Not easily. But successfully. The company retained most of the business. The employees kept their jobs. The crisis passed. Susan celebrated by taking the management team to dinner. Halfway through the meal, she raised a glass. A rare occurrence. Susan wasn't sentimental. You know what makes Emily valuable? The room grew quiet. Emily immediately felt uncomfortable. Public praise wasn't her favorite thing. Susan ignored her expression. She takes ownership. Several people nodded. Most people accept responsibility when things go well. The older woman smiled. Emily accepts responsibility when things go badly. That observation stayed with Emily, because she realized it wasn't really a compliment. It was a description. A description of the values William had spent years teaching her. The same values he lived by himself. Meanwhile, Olivia faced another difficult reality. The house finally went on the market. The decision felt humiliating, not because selling a house was embarrassing, because of what it represented. A retreat, a step backward, a visible acknowledgement that things weren't working. The first showing took place on a Thursday afternoon. Olivia spent hours preparing, cleaning, organizing, making everything look perfect. When prospective buyers arrived, she smiled politely, answered questions, pretended everything was fine. The moment they left, she sat alone in the kitchen, staring at the empty rooms. The silence felt different now, heavy, uncomfortable. For years she had wanted this house, dreamed about it, worked toward it. Now all she wanted was freedom from it. The realization disturbed her, because it forced an uncomfortable question. If achieving the goal didn't create happiness, what would? She never found an answer. Not then. A few days later, Daniel came home carrying good news. The house had received a strong offer, the best offer they were likely to get. Financially, it made sense. Practically, it made sense. Emotionally, it felt terrible. The sale closed 6 weeks later. Moving day arrived shortly afterward. As workers carried furniture out of the house, Olivia stood in the foyer watching. The same foyer she once loved. The same foyer she once believed represented success. Now it felt empty. Not because the furniture was gone, because the illusion was gone. For the first time in years, there was nothing left to hide behind. No oversized mortgage. No luxury address. No carefully crafted image. Just reality. And reality was considerably less impressive. William heard about the sale during a family dinner. Most relatives treated the news delicately, trying not to embarrass anyone. William simply nodded, then changed the subject. Not because he lacked compassion, because houses weren't important. People were, and he had become increasingly concerned about something else. Time. His health continued declining. Slowly, steadily. The doctors remained optimistic. William remained realistic. One evening he sat alone in his study, reviewing old photographs, pictures from decades of family gatherings, vacations, birthdays, graduations, memories, thousands of memories. At one point he found a photograph of Emily and Olivia as children. The girls sat on the dock at the lake house, laughing, smiling, completely inseparable. William stared at the image for a long time. Longer than he intended. Because looking at it hurt. Not because of what happened, because of what could have been. He often wondered when things changed. Not the betrayal. The rivalry. The comparison. The competition. The seeds had been there long before Daniel entered the picture. Long before adulthood complicated everything. Maybe even long before anyone noticed. The realization saddened him. Because despite everything, he still loved both granddaughters. Deeply. The world often forced people to choose sides. William refused. Love wasn't the problem. Trust was. And unfortunately, trust was the very thing he needed most. Several weeks later he met with Richard Harrison again. Final revisions. Final signatures. Final instructions. The process took most of the afternoon. When everything was complete, Richard organized the documents carefully. Then locked them away. The attorney looked at William. This is going to surprise people. William smiled. Good. Richard laughed. You planned that? Maybe. The old man stood, gathered his coat, prepared to leave. Then paused. There will be questions. There always are. Richard nodded. And criticism. William smiled again. There always is. The attorney shook his head. You really are comfortable with this? For a moment William looked toward the window, watching sunlight reflect off nearby the leers, thinking about the years, the choices, the people, the lessons. Then he gave the simplest answer possible. It's fair. And in William Carter's mind, fairness mattered far more than popularity, especially when it came to legacy. Because by then the decision had been made. The future had already been written. The only thing left was time. And time, more than anything else, was the one thing William no longer controlled. The summer before William Carter died felt different. Nobody said it out loud. Nobody wanted to. But everyone felt it. The family gatherings became a little more frequent. Phone calls lasted a little longer. Visits happened a little more often. It wasn't because William was seriously ill. Not exactly. It was because age had finally become impossible to ignore. For decades, he had seemed indestructible. The man was always moving, always working, always building something. Then one day people realized he wasn't walking quite as fast anymore. The stairs took a little longer. The long days became shorter. The changes were small, but they added up. And for the first time, the Carter family found themselves imagining a future without him. A future none of them wanted. Emily spent more time at the lake house that summer than she had in years. Partly because work had become more flexible. Partly because she enjoyed the visits. Mostly because she knew those moments mattered. One Saturday morning, she arrived carrying breakfast. William was already sitting on the porch, coffee in hand, watching the lake. A familiar sight, one that had become almost comforting. The old man smiled when he saw her. "You're late." Emily laughed. "I'm 15 minutes early." "Still late." She shook her head. Some things never changed. Thankfully, the morning passed quietly. Coffee, conversation, stories, simple things. The kind people overlook until they're gone. At one point, William surprised her. "Do you remember your first job?" Emily groaned immediately. "Oh no." William laughed. "Oh yes." She already knew where this was going. At 16, she had spent an entire summer helping organize records at one of the company's storage facilities. It had been hot, boring, miserable. William insisted it was important. Emily disagreed, strongly. "You spent 3 months complaining. It was terrible. You spent the entire summer alphabetizing paperwork. It was torture." William laughed harder. Then his expression softened. "You never quit." Emily smiled, because she remembered that part too. There had been plenty of opportunities to quit. Plenty of excuses. She simply never considered it. At the time, she thought stubbornness was the reason. Years later, she realized something else. Responsibility. If she started something, she finished it. The lesson seemed insignificant. It wasn't. Across town, Olivia spent the summer dealing with an entirely different reality. The house sale had solved some problems. Not all of them. Financial pressure remained. The marriage remained strained. And perhaps most frustrating of all, life refused to return to the version she preferred. The version where success looked obvious, visible, impressive. The smaller home they purchased was perfectly comfortable, practical, reasonable. Olivia hated it, not because anything was wrong with it, because it felt like proof. Proof that things had changed. Proof that she wasn't moving forward, at least not in the way she wanted. Daniel, meanwhile, seemed relieved. The smaller mortgage reduced stress. The simpler lifestyle reduced pressure. For the first time in years, he actually seemed happier. That only irritated Olivia more, because she couldn't understand how someone could be satisfied with less. One evening, the disagreement finally surfaced. The two sat on the back patio after dinner. The conversation began normally, then shifted, as it often did, toward money, toward success, toward the future. Daniel listened for several minutes, then finally spoke. "Maybe this is enough." Olivia looked at him. "What?" "This." He gestured toward the house, their life, everything. "Maybe we don't need more." The silence that followed felt endless, because Daniel had just challenged something fundamental, not a financial goal, not an investment, an entire worldview. Olivia shook her head. "You sound like you've given up." Daniel laughed, not because it was funny, because he was tired. Really tired. "No." He looked directly at her. "I think I've finally stopped chasing things." The conversation ended shortly afterward. Neither convinced the other. Neither understood the other, and the distance between them continued growing. Back at the lake house, William spent most of the summer reflecting. More than usual. The old man had always been thoughtful. Now he seemed reflective, as though he was reviewing his life, examining it. Looking backward before time ran out, one afternoon he invited several longtime friends over for lunch. Men he had known for decades. People who remembered the earliest days of the company, the earliest struggles, the earliest victories. The stories flowed effortlessly. Failed projects, lucky breaks, economic downturns, near disasters. All the moments that eventually become memories. At one point, one of the men asked a simple question. "What are you most proud of?" The answers varied. Children, businesses, marriages, careers. Eventually the question reached William. He considered it carefully, then surprised everyone. Nothing I built. Several people laughed, assuming he was joking. He wasn't. The old man looked toward the lake. I'm proud of the people who became better than I was. The table fell silent, because everyone understood exactly what he meant. Legacy. Real legacy. Not buildings. Not money. Not companies. People. The realization stayed with him long after lunch ended. As autumn approached, his health declined more noticeably. Nothing dramatic, just enough. Enough that doctors began using more cautious language. Enough that family members started paying closer attention. Enough that William himself began preparing. One evening he called Emily unexpectedly. Boosie. Not too busy. Come over. The request sounded ordinary. Something about it felt important. She arrived an hour later. The lake house was quiet. Unusually quiet. William sat in the living room reviewing photographs. The same box she had seen months earlier. He motioned for her to sit. For nearly an hour they looked through old pictures together. Family vacations. Birthdays. Christmas mornings. A lifetime compressed into photographs. Eventually Emily noticed something. William wasn't talking much. He was mostly listening. Watching. Remembering. Then he handed her a photograph. A very old one. Emily and Olivia as children. Standing on the dock. Holding fishing poles. Smiling at something outside the frame. For a long moment neither spoke. Finally William asked a question. When was the last time you were both this happy? Emily stared at the photograph. The answer never came, because she genuinely didn't know. The realization hurt more than expected. William nodded slowly, as though he already understood. Then he placed the photograph back into the box. The conversation shifted elsewhere. Neither mentioned it again. But as Emily drove home that night, she couldn't stop thinking about the picture. About childhood. About family. About all the years between then and now. And for the first time in a long while, she wondered whether some losses were even sadder than betrayal. Because betrayal destroys trust. But time destroys possibilities. The possibility of what might have been. The possibility of what never happened. The possibility of relationships that could have been saved. Meanwhile, sitting alone on the porch after Emily left, William watched darkness settle over the lake. The air was cool. The water calm. The night peaceful. For the first time, he felt ready. Not eager. Not afraid. Simply ready. The decisions were made. The paperwork was complete. The future was arranged. All that remained was whatever time he had left. And as the old man stared across the water he had loved for decades, one thought returned again and again. He hoped they would understand. Not immediately. Not when emotions were high. Not when money became involved. Eventually. Because the final lesson he planned to leave behind wasn't about wealth. It never had been. It was about character. And character, unlike money, survived long after a person was gone. William Carter died on a Tuesday morning. Peacefully, quietly, exactly the way he would have wanted. The phone calls began shortly after sunrise. Family members contacted one another. Messages spread. Plans were made. Flights were booked. Meetings were canceled. Lives paused. Because regardless of disagreements, rivalries, or distance, everyone understood one thing. The Carter family had just lost its foundation. Emily received the call while preparing for work. The moment she heard her mother's voice, she knew. Some news announces itself before a single word is spoken. The drive to the lake house felt unreal. The roads looked normal. People continued their routines. The world remained unchanged. Yet everything felt different. By the time she arrived, several relatives were already there. Cars filled the driveway. Voices drifted through the house. Some people cried openly. Others sat quietly. Everyone seemed lost. Emily stepped inside. The familiar smell of the lake house hit her immediately. Coffee. Wood. The faint scent of the lake itself. For a moment she expected William to appear from another room, to make a joke, to complain someone was late, to ask about work. Instead there was silence, and suddenly the reality became unavoidable. He was gone. Hours later Olivia arrived, Daniel beside her. The moment Emily saw her sister, something unexpected happened. The years disappeared. Not the betrayal, not the hurt, the years. Because Olivia looked devastated, genuinely devastated. The carefully controlled image she usually presented to the world was gone. No confidence, no performance, no competition. Just grief. For the first time in a very long time, Emily saw her little sister again. The little girl from old photographs. The little girl who used to follow William everywhere. The little girl who once sat on the dock, holding a fishing pole far too large for her. The sight hurt, because it reminded her of something important. People can be flawed and loved at the same time. The funeral took place 4 days later. The church overflowed. Business leaders attended. Former employees attended. Friends attended. Neighbors attended. People traveled from multiple states. Some hadn't seen William in years. They came anyway, because truly respected people create that kind of impact. The service lasted nearly 2 hours. Story after story filled the room. Acts of generosity nobody knew about. Quiet kindnesses. Unexpected help. Moments that changed lives. Again and again. The same theme emerged. William had never cared much about appearances. He cared about people. When the service ended, dozens remained outside talking long afterward. Nobody seemed eager to leave. As though leaving would make everything feel more permanent. Emily stood near the cemetery watching people gather in small groups, sharing memories, laughing through tears, remembering. Then someone approached. Richard Harrison, the family attorney. He greeted her politely, offered condolences, then quietly handed her a business card. The reading will take place next Monday. Emily nodded. She had almost forgotten about the will. Not because it wasn't important, because everything else felt more important. Richard continued, "Everyone will be notified." Then he walked away. Simple, professional, nothing unusual. Yet the interaction stayed with her, because it reminded her that another chapter was approaching. One nobody could avoid. Over the following days, conversations about the will began appearing everywhere. Quietly at first, then more openly. People speculated, wondered, guessed. The Carter estate was substantial. Everyone knew that. William owned businesses, properties, investments, assets accumulated across decades. Naturally, people were curious. Some family members discussed charitable donations. Others discussed succession. A few openly debated who would inherit what. Emily avoided those conversations. Not intentionally. They simply didn't interest her. At least not yet. Meanwhile, Olivia became noticeably more engaged. Questions appeared more frequently. Comments surfaced more often. Small observations that revealed where her attention had shifted. The grief remained, but something else had joined it. Expectation. One evening, 5 days before the reading, Olivia and Daniel hosted dinner for several relatives. Emily declined the invitation. Others attended. The conversation eventually turned toward the future, toward the company, toward the estate, toward inheritance. According to several family members who later discussed the evening, Olivia seemed remarkably confident. Not arrogant. Certain. As though she already knew how everything would unfold. As though the outcome had been decided long ago. Perhaps she believed it had. After all, many people shared the same assumption. William's wealth would remain within the immediate family. The company would eventually pass to family leadership. The future would follow the path everyone expected. Reasonable assumptions. Logical assumptions. Dangerous assumptions. The following weekend, Emily visited the lake house one final time before the reading. The property felt different. Empty. The silence seemed louder. Every room contained memories. Every corner reminded her of William. She wandered through the house slowly, taking her time, remembering. In the study, she paused beside the desk where he had spent countless hours working. The chair remained exactly where he left it. The books remained untouched. The photographs remained in place. Everything looked normal, except it wasn't. On the corner of the desk sat a framed photograph, the same one William had shown her months earlier, her and Olivia as children, standing on the dock, smiling, happy. Emily picked it up, studied it. For a long moment she simply stood there, thinking. Then she returned it to its place, because some memories belong where they were left. That evening she walked down to the dock. The sun was setting. Orange light reflected across the water, the exact view William loved, the exact place where so many conversations happened, the exact place where he had taught her lessons she didn't fully appreciate until adulthood. For several minutes she sat alone, listening to the water, listening to the wind, listening to the silence. Then she remembered something he once said, a conversation from years earlier, one she hadn't thought about in a long time. People tell you who they are every day. At the time she didn't understand. Now she did. Because William spent his entire life paying attention, observing, learning, understanding, perhaps better than anyone she had ever known. As darkness settled across the lake, Emily finally stood. The reading would happen in less than 48 hours. The family would gather. Questions would be answered. The future would become clearer. At least that's what everyone believed. What nobody realized was that William Carter had spent years preparing one final surprise. A surprise so significant that it would alter the course of multiple lives. A surprise hidden behind legal documents, sealed envelopes, and decisions nobody saw being made. And somewhere across town, Olivia sat beside Daniel discussing possibilities, discussing expectations, discussing a future she believed was already waiting for her. She couldn't know it yet. None of them could. But the story she had been telling herself for years was about to collide with reality. And reality was rarely as predictable as people hoped. The rain started just before noon. A slow, steady rain, the kind that turns the sky gray and makes everything feel quieter. By 1 o'clock, members of the Carter family were arriving at Richard Harrison's office. One by one. Some came alone. Some arrived in pairs. Everyone carried the same expression, curiosity mixed with grief. Because despite all the conversations, all the speculation, and all the assumptions, nobody actually knew what William Carter had decided. Not completely. And that uncertainty filled the building. Emily arrived early. Habit. She always preferred arriving early. It gave her time to settle her thoughts. Time to observe. Time to breathe. Richard greeted her politely and showed her into the conference room. The long oak table looked exactly as she remembered from years earlier. Professional. Orderly. Impersonal. Yet somehow it felt heavier today. As though the room understood the importance of what was about to happen. Family members gradually filled the chairs. Conversations remained quiet, respectful. Nobody seemed eager to be the first person to mention money. Eventually, Olivia and Daniel arrived. The atmosphere shifted almost immediately. Not dramatically, just enough. Enough for Emily to nervous. Olivia looked nervous. That surprised her. She expected confidence. Instead, she saw tension. The kind people carry when they're trying not to show how much something matters. Daniel looked even worse. Tired, distracted, anxious. The previous few years had clearly taken a toll on both of them. Richard waited until everyone settled. Then closed the conference room door. The sound seemed louder than it should have. A signal, a beginning. The room fell silent. Richard adjusted his glasses, opened a folder, and began. Thank you all for coming. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The attorney continued. As you know, William Carter left detailed instructions regarding the distribution of his estate. The words sounded formal, expected, routine. Yet everyone listened carefully. Every sentence mattered now. Every word carried weight. Richard spent several minutes explaining the process, legal procedures, administrative details, necessary information. Most people paid only partial attention. They were waiting for the important part, the decisions, the answers, the future. Richard eventually reached the first distribution. Several charitable donations, local organizations, scholarship funds, community programs. The announcement surprised some people, not Emily. William had always believed wealth should accomplish something useful. The donations felt entirely consistent with who he was. Additional distributions followed. Personal items, family keepsakes, collections, property allocations. The process moved steadily, professionally, without drama, at least initially. Then something changed. Richard opened a different folder, a thicker folder, one that immediately captured everyone's attention, because everyone understood what it represented: the major assets, the company, the investments, the estate itself. The room became noticeably quieter. Emily glanced toward Olivia. Her sister sat perfectly still, focused, waiting. Daniel looked much the same. Richard reviewed several pages, then looked up. The remaining portions of the estate involved more substantial holdings. Nobody spoke. Nobody interrupted. The tension continued building. Several family members shifted in their seats. Others folded their hands. Everyone seemed to brace themselves. Richard continued. As instructed by William Carter, I will address these matters in the order specified within the estate documents. The attorney reached for another page, then paused. A small pause, barely noticeable, except Emily noticed, because Richard looked toward a sealed envelope resting beside the folder. The same envelope. The one she remembered seeing years earlier. The one William apparently added late in the process. Richard stared at it for a moment, then returned his attention to the documents. Emily felt a strange sensation, a sudden awareness, as though something important sat just beyond reach, something nobody else seemed to notice. The attorney continued. The Carter Development Corporation will remain privately held. That statement immediately drew attention. The company represented the largest piece of William's legacy. Everyone understood that. Control of the company mattered. Perhaps more than any other asset. Richard continued reading. Additional legal language followed. Corporate structures, voting rights, ownership mechanisms, technical details, complicated details. Emily found herself struggling to follow everything, not because it was unclear, because it felt like the attorney was building toward something. Then Richard stopped. He removed his glasses, looked around the room, and quietly said something unexpected. Before I continue, there is an additional statement William instructed me to read. The room froze. Additional statement. Several family members exchanged confused looks. This wasn't mentioned before. Richard picked up a separate document, unfolded it carefully, then began reading. If you're hearing this, you're probably wondering why I made certain decisions. The room became completely silent. William's voice seemed to fill the space. Not literally, emotionally. The words sounded like him. Felt like him. Richard continued. People spend a great deal of time worrying about what they deserve. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The attorney read on. The problem is that deserving something and wanting something are often confused. Several relatives shifted uncomfortably. Richard kept reading. Throughout my life I have watched people pursue success for different reasons. Emily found herself staring at the table, listening carefully, because something about the statement felt different. More personal, more direct, more intentional. The people who impressed me most were rarely the people chasing money. Silence. They were the people chasing purpose. The room remained perfectly still. Richard turned the page. Then read the final section. Money can build a comfortable life. A pause. It cannot build character. Another pause. Character must come first. When the statement ended, nobody spoke. Not immediately. The room seemed trapped between grief and curiosity, between memory and expectation. Richard carefully folded the pages, then placed them aside. Emily looked toward Olivia. For the first time all afternoon, her sister seemed unsettled. Not worried, just uncertain. The statement clearly wasn't what she expected. Then again, it wasn't what anyone expected. Richard took a sip of water, reached for the main folder, and prepared to continue. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows. Inside, anticipation became almost unbearable, because everyone sensed the moment approaching, the real moment. The moment answers would finally arrive. The moment assumptions would collide with reality. Years of expectations. Years of beliefs. Years of quiet confidence. Everything was about to be tested. And although nobody knew it yet, the next few minutes would change the Carter family forever. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The rain continued tapping softly against the windows as Richard Harrison turned another page. The silence inside the conference room felt almost unnatural. Every person present understood they had reached the moment everyone had been waiting for. The company, the estate, the future. Years of speculation were about to end. Richard adjusted his glasses, then continued reading. The remaining estate assets include controlling interests in Carter Development Corporation, associated holdings, investment accounts, commercial properties, residential properties, and related trusts. The room remained silent. Several people leaned forward slightly. Even those who claimed they weren't interested suddenly seemed very interested. Because curiosity is human, especially when life-changing decisions are involved. Richard continued. As directed by William Carter, ownership and controlling authority over Carter Development Corporation shall be transferred to Guan. He stopped briefly. Only for a second. But it felt much longer. Then he spoke the name. Emily Carter. The room froze. Not figuratively. Actually, for several seconds nobody reacted at all. It was as if the words had arrived in a language nobody understood. Emily blinked. Certain she had misheard. Certain there had been some mistake. Across the table, Olivia stared at Richard. Expressionless. Completely expressionless. Daniel looked equally stunned. Several relatives exchanged confused glances. Others simply sat motionless, trying to process what they had heard. Richard continued reading. But Emily barely heard him, because her mind was struggling to catch up. Ownership, control, responsibility, the company, her. The words didn't make sense. Not yet, the attorney continued. The majority voting shares currently held by William Carter shall transfer to Emily Carter immediately upon execution of estate directives. A murmur spread through the room. Small at first, then larger. People weren't speaking loudly. They were speaking because they couldn't help themselves. The outcome surprised everyone. Everyone, including Emily, especially Emily. Because unlike some members of the family, she had never expected anything, never planned for it, never assumed it. The realization made the moment feel even more unreal. Richard waited for the room to settle, then continued. The accompanying commercial property portfolio shall likewise transfer under the same structure. More silence. More disbelief. The list continued, property after property, investment after investment, asset after asset, and every announcement pointed in the same direction. Emily, not everything, but enough. More than enough. Far more than anyone expected. By the time Richard finished the section, the atmosphere in the room had completely changed. Shock had replaced anticipation. Confusion had replaced certainty. Nobody seemed to know what to say. Eventually one relative spoke. I don't understand. The comment broke the silence. Others immediately began asking questions. Nothing hostile. Just confusion. Genuine confusion. Because the outcome contradicted years of assumptions. Years of expectations. Years of quiet predictions. Richard raised a hand. There is additional information. The room gradually settled again. Emily finally looked toward Olivia. The sight unsettled her. Because her sister wasn't angry. Not yet. She looked lost, like someone who had spent years following a map only to discover the destination didn't exist. Daniel appeared equally stunned, perhaps more so. The confidence both of them had carried for years seemed to vanish in an instant. Richard reached for another document, then paused. His eyes shifted toward the sealed envelope resting beside the folder. The room noticed immediately. Everyone seemed aware of it now. The mysterious envelope. The one William added separately. The one nobody had discussed. Richard carefully picked it up. This document contains specific instructions regarding a personal statement. The tension returned instantly. People sat straighter, focused harder, waited. The attorney opened the envelope, removed several pages, and began reading. This message is intended specifically for Olivia. The room became completely silent. Emily felt her stomach tighten. Across the table, Olivia's eyes widened slightly. Nobody expected this. Richard continued. If you're hearing this, then I am gone. A familiar beginning. Very William. The attorney turned the page. I suspect you may be disappointed by some of the decisions made today. The words landed heavily. Nobody moved. Nobody interrupted. The statement continued. I want you to understand something important. Richard's voice remained steady, calm, professional. The decisions I made were never about punishment. Olivia lowered her eyes. Daniel stared straight ahead. The room remained motionless. They were about trust. A pause. Then another. They were about responsibility. Richard continued reading. And they were about character. Emily immediately remembered those same words. Character. The lesson William repeated throughout his life. The lesson he never seemed to stop teaching. Even now, even after death, the attorney continued. I loved both of my granddaughters. Several people shifted. The statement suddenly felt intimate, painful. I still do. Emily felt emotion building in her chest, because she could hear William in every sentence. Every word sounded like him. Then came the part nobody expected, especially Olivia. You spent much of your life believing success could be acquired. The room grew even quieter. If you married the right person. A pause. If you owned the right house. Another pause. If you inherited the right fortune. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Richard continued. The problem is that success doesn't work that way. Across the table, Olivia sat perfectly still. The color had begun leaving her face. Not because the statement was cruel, because it was honest. Painfully honest. William wasn't attacking her. He was describing her. And everyone in the room knew it. The attorney turned another page. The greatest mistake of your life was believing that wanting something made you entitled to it. The words struck like a hammer. Several relatives looked down immediately. Others stared at the table. Nobody wanted to witness this. Yet nobody could look away. Richard continued. I watched you chase appearances. Silence. I watched you chase status. More silence. I watched you chase money. The room felt frozen. Then came the sentence that changed everything. And while you were chasing all of those things, Emily was quietly building character. Emily closed her eyes. Not because she felt victorious. Because she felt heartbroken. This wasn't triumph. This was tragedy. A grandfather explaining why he couldn't trust one granddaughter with his legacy. The realization hurt. More than she expected. Richard continued. Character is what remains when nobody is watching. The same lesson. Again. The lesson William never stopped teaching. The lesson he apparently intended to leave behind. Even now. The attorney reached the final paragraph. I hope one day you understand that my decision was not about what you lost. A pause. It was about what you still have the opportunity to become. The room remained silent. Perfectly silent. Richard lowered the pages. Nobody spoke. Nobody seemed capable of speaking. Because the statement wasn't really about money, or inheritance, or ownership. It was about something much deeper. A lifetime of observations. A lifetime of lessons. A lifetime of conclusions. And now those conclusions sat in the middle of the conference room for everyone to see. Olivia remained motionless, staring at the table, staring at nothing. The confidence she carried for years had vanished. The certainty had vanished. The assumptions had vanished. Everything she believed about the future had disappeared in a matter of minutes. And for the first time in a very long time, she had no idea what came next. Neither did anyone else. Because although the will had been read, the real consequences were only beginning. And the hardest conversations still hadn't happened. Nobody left immediately. That was the strange part. After the reading ended, after the documents were explained, after the legal questions were answered, people simply remained seated. As if standing up would somehow make everything real. The silence lingered, heavy, uncomfortable, permanent. Richard Harrison spent several minutes answering procedural questions. Transfer timelines, corporate formalities, administrative requirements. Nobody seemed particularly interested, not really, because everyone was still thinking about the same thing. William's letter, the words, the honesty, the conclusions. Those were the things people couldn't stop replaying. Eventually chairs began moving. Family members stood. Conversations started. Quiet conversations. Careful conversations. The kind people have when nobody knows the correct thing to say. Emily remained seated. She felt overwhelmed. Not by the money. Not by the company. By the responsibility. That was the only thing she could think about. Responsibility. William trusted her. The realization felt larger than the inheritance itself. Far larger, because money could be managed. Property could be managed. Businesses could be managed. Trust was different. Trust had to be earned, and now she carried the weight of it. Across the room, Olivia still hadn't moved. Daniel sat beside her. Neither spoke. Neither seemed interested in speaking. The shock had settled into something else. Something quieter. Something heavier. Reality. Eventually Daniel stood. Slowly. Carefully. Then extended a hand toward his wife. For a moment Olivia didn't react. Then, she accepted it. The gesture looked less like affection and more like survival. Two people trying to remain standing while the ground shifted beneath them. Emily watched them leave. Not with satisfaction. Not with anger. With sadness. Because despite everything that happened, she had never actually wanted this outcome. She never spent years hoping Olivia would fail. Never wished for humiliation. Never dreamed about revenge. The truth was far simpler. She just wanted peace. And somehow peace still felt very far away. Outside, rain continued falling. The parking lot looked gray and empty. People departed one by one. Eventually, only a handful remained, including Emily. Richard approached her carrying a folder. A large folder. The reality of that folder made everything feel even more serious. These are yours. Emily accepted it. The weight surprised her. Not physically. Emotionally. Richard seemed to understand. He trusted you. The words echoed something she was already thinking. Emily nodded. I know. The attorney smiled gently. No. He shook his head. I don't think you do. The comment stayed with her long after she left. Across town, Olivia sat in complete silence during the drive home. Daniel didn't attempt conversation. He knew better. Some people need time. Some people need space. Today Olivia needed both. The windshield wipers moved steadily back and forth. The repetitive sound filled the car. Neither spoke for nearly 20 minutes. Finally Olivia broke the silence. He was wrong. Daniel looked over. Not surprised. Not really. The reaction was predictable. He was wrong. She repeated it. More firmly this time. Daniel remained quiet. Because arguing wouldn't help. Not yet. He didn't understand. The words sounded convincing. Almost convincing. Then silence returned. Several minutes passed. Then something changed. Very slightly. The confidence disappeared from her voice. And suddenly she asked a different question. What if he did? Daniel didn't answer. Because he couldn't. The question wasn't meant for him. It was meant for herself. And for the first time, Olivia seemed genuinely uncertain about the answer. That uncertainty followed her into the evening, then into the next day, then into the following week. The letter became impossible to escape. Every sentence returned repeatedly. Every observation, every criticism, every conclusion. The worst part wasn't that William judged her. The worst part was that portions of it felt true, painfully true. Meanwhile, news of the inheritance spread quickly, not publicly, privately, within business circles, within family circles, within the company itself. People were surprised. Some were shocked. Others quietly admitted the decision made sense. The reaction inside Carter Development proved particularly interesting. Many employees expected uncertainty, questions. Instead, something else happened: relief. Emily noticed it during her first executive meeting. Several senior leaders congratulated her, not because of the inheritance, because they trusted her. The realization caught her off guard. One executive explained it best. "We know how you work." The comment seemed simple. It wasn't. Because nobody mentioned William's money. Nobody mentioned ownership percentages. Nobody mentioned authority. They talked about judgment, responsibility, integrity, the exact things William spent years evaluating. For the first time, Emily began understanding what Richard meant. He trusted you. Not the business, not the assets, you. The distinction mattered enormously. Several weeks later, Olivia requested a meeting. The message arrived unexpectedly. A simple text. "Can we talk?" Emily stared at it for a long time. Long enough that the screen dimmed, then dimmed again. She wasn't afraid of the conversation. She simply didn't know what version of Olivia would arrive. The angry version, the defensive version, the wounded version, the competitive version. There had been so many versions over the years. Eventually, she agreed. The meeting took place at a small coffee shop. Neutral ground. Public enough to prevent arguments. Private enough for conversation. When Olivia arrived, Emily immediately noticed the difference. The confidence was gone. Not entirely, but enough. Years earlier, Olivia entered rooms expecting attention. Today, she looked uncomfortable, almost nervous. The two ordered coffee, then sat in silence for several moments. Neither seemed eager to begin. Finally, Olivia spoke. "Do you agree with him?" Emily knew exactly who she meant. William, the letter, everything. The question felt impossible, because the answer wasn't simple. Numdo. Olivia looked relieved. Then Emily continued. Not completely. The relief disappeared. The silence returned. Eventually, Olivia laughed softly, a sad laugh. The kind people make when they already know the answer. He was right about some things. The admission surprised both of them, especially Olivia, because it was probably the most honest thing she had said in years. Emily didn't interrupt, didn't judge, didn't rescue her. She simply listened. And for nearly an hour, something unexpected happened. The two sisters had a real conversation. Not a pleasant one. Not an easy one. A real one. The kind they should have had years earlier. The kind neither had been mature enough to have before. When the meeting ended, nothing was fixed. No dramatic reconciliation occurred. No miraculous healing happened. The damage remained. The history remained. The pain remained. But something else appeared. A possibility. Small, fragile, uncertain. The possibility that the story wasn't finished yet. And somewhere, if William could have seen that conversation, he probably would have smiled. Because for the first time in a very long time, both of his granddaughters were finally facing the truth. Not about the inheritance. Not about money. About themselves. And that was where real change always began. The conversation at the coffee shop changed something. Not everything. Just enough. For the first time in years, Olivia stopped blaming everyone else. Not completely. Not immediately. But the process had begun. And once that process starts, it becomes difficult to stop. Because self-awareness is uncomfortable. It forces people to confront things they spent years avoiding. Olivia was discovering that firsthand. The weeks following the inheritance reading were among the hardest of her life. Not because of the money. At least not entirely. Because the money had never really been the point. The point was what the money represented. Validation. Proof. Confirmation that she had won. When William gave the company to Emily, that illusion shattered. And now Olivia found herself asking questions she had spent years avoiding. Questions without easy answers. Questions that kept her awake at night. Questions she couldn't silence. One evening she sat alone in the living room while Daniel worked late. The television played quietly in the background. She wasn't watching it. Her attention remained fixed on a photograph sitting on a nearby shelf. A family photograph. One taken nearly a decade earlier. Before the affair. Before the marriage. Before everything. William stood in the center. Emily stood beside him. Olivia stood on the other side. Everyone smiling. Everyone together. The image felt like it belonged to strangers. The longer she stared at it, the more uncomfortable she became. Because she remembered something. Years earlier, she used to compare herself to Emily constantly. Everything felt like a competition. Grades, attention, success, relationships, even affection. Especially affection. The realization bothered her. Because she finally understood something. Emily had never been competing. Only Olivia had. The race existed entirely inside her own head. And somehow that made the truth worse. Several months later, another problem arrived. Daniel lost his job. The company he worked for underwent restructuring. Departments were eliminated. Positions disappeared. His was one of them. The situation wasn't his fault. The economy remained unpredictable. The real estate industry had changed significantly. Layoffs happened everywhere. Yet the news hit hard. Very hard. Because financial setbacks feel different when they arrive after years of other disappointments. The timing couldn't have been worse. Savings were already reduced. Investments had already failed. Stress already filled the household. Now uncertainty joined the list. For several weeks Daniel searched for new opportunities. Interviews came and went. Conversations happened. Possibilities appeared. Nothing materialized. The process became exhausting, discouraging, humiliating. One afternoon Olivia walked into the kitchen and found him staring at a laptop screen. Job applications. Rejection emails. Silence. The scene broke her heart. Not because Daniel had never struggled. Because she had never really paid attention when he did. That realization arrived unexpectedly. And once again it forced her to confront an uncomfortable truth. For years she focused so heavily on what she wanted that she rarely considered what other people needed. The thought followed her everywhere. Weeks later, Daniel finally received an offer. The position was solid, stable, respectable. The salary, however, was significantly lower than before. Years earlier, Olivia would have considered that unacceptable. Now she simply felt relieved. Perspective changes people, especially after enough disappointments. Meanwhile, Emily's life continued moving forward. The transition into leadership at Carter Development proved challenging. The responsibility was enormous. The expectations were even larger. Every decision affected employees, families, communities. The weight never disappeared. Some days it felt overwhelming. Yet she never considered walking away. Because the company wasn't just a business anymore. It was a trust. A responsibility William had placed in her hands. One she intended to honor. Several senior executives offered support. Many had worked alongside William for decades. They knew the company better than anyone. Their guidance proved invaluable. One afternoon, Emily found herself standing in William's old office. The office now belonged to her. The thought still felt strange. She walked toward the window. The same window William used to stand beside. The same view he spent years looking at. For several moments she simply stared at the city. Thinking. Remembering. Then her attention settled on a framed photograph sitting on the bookshelf. William, smiling, confident. The photograph seemed almost alive. Emily laughed softly. "You really left me a mess." The empty office offered no response. Yet somehow she felt better afterward, as if he would have appreciated the comment. Months passed. Life continued. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Olivia changed. Not dramatically. Not overnight. Small changes, consistent changes. The kind that actually last. She stopped talking about money constantly. Stopped comparing herself to everyone else. Stopped measuring success through appearances. The transformation wasn't perfect. Old habits remained. Some probably always would. But progress existed. Real progress. One Saturday morning she volunteered at a community housing program. Not because it looked good. Not because anyone asked. Because she wanted to help. The experience surprised her. The work was difficult. Uncomfortable. Rewarding. For the first time in years, she spent an entire day focused on other people. The feeling stayed with her afterward. Months later she returned. Then returned again. The pattern continued. And gradually something remarkable happened. She started becoming someone different. Not a new person. A better version of herself. The version William always hoped existed beneath the surface. Unfortunately, growth often arrives alongside regret. The more Olivia changed, the more clearly she saw her past. The affair. The jealousy. The competition. The choices. The consequences. The understanding hurt. Deeply. Because mature people eventually realize something important. Regret isn't punishment. It's education. The problem is that education often arrives too late. One evening, nearly a year after the inheritance reading, Olivia sat alone on her porch, watching the sunset, a simple activity, one William loved. For the first time she understood why. The silence felt peaceful. The world felt slower. The constant pressure she carried for years seemed distant. Not gone. Distant. And as she watched the fading sunlight disappear beyond the horizon, a thought entered her mind. A simple thought. One she wished she had understood years earlier. You cannot build a meaningful life by trying to take someone else's. The realization brought tears. Not dramatic tears. Quiet ones. The kind that arrive when a person finally stops running from the truth. And somewhere deep inside, Olivia finally accepted something. William hadn't rejected her. He had tried to teach her. The lesson simply took longer than either of them expected. The tragedy was that she only understood it after he was gone. Almost a year passed after the reading of the will. For the first time in a long time, the Carter family seemed stable. Not perfect. Stable. The endless tension that once dominated every gathering had softened. The arguments became less frequent. The awkward silences became shorter. Even family dinners felt different. More relaxed. Less competitive. As if everyone was finally learning how to exist without William standing in the center holding everything together. Emily remained busy running Carter development. The transition had been harder than anyone realized, including her. There were days she questioned every decision. Days she wondered whether William had made a mistake. Days she felt completely overwhelmed. Then she would remember something. William had never expected perfection. Only responsibility. That thought usually helped. Meanwhile, Olivia continued changing in ways nobody expected. Including herself. She still had flaws. Plenty of them. But she no longer seemed obsessed with appearances. The constant need to impress people had faded. Not disappeared. Faded. Which was progress. Real progress. One afternoon, Emily received a phone call from Richard Harrison, the family attorney. The timing seemed strange. The estate had already been settled. Most legal matters were complete. Naturally, she assumed something was wrong. Instead, Richard sounded almost amused. "I need you and Olivia to come to my office." Emily frowned. "Why?" "I can't explain over the phone." That answer immediately annoyed her. "What does that mean?" "It means your grandfather was still surprising people after he died." The line went quiet. Emily stared at her phone, then laughed. That sounded exactly like William. 3 days later, both sisters arrived at Richard's office. The atmosphere felt very different from the last time. Less tension, less anxiety, less uncertainty. Not because everything was resolved. Because enough time had passed. People had adjusted. Reality had settled. When Olivia entered the conference room, she looked confused. Not nervous, simply curious. Richard greeted both women, then placed a folder on the table. A single folder. Nothing dramatic. Nothing impressive. Yet something about it felt important. The attorney sat down, removed several documents, then smiled. Your grandfather left one final instruction. Both sisters exchanged glances. Neither spoke. Richard opened the folder. Approximately 6 months before his death, William established a family trust. Emily frowned. She knew about most of William's financial arrangements. This wasn't familiar. The attorney continued. The trust contains several properties, investment accounts, and long-term family assets. The amount wasn't as large as the primary estate. Still substantial. Very substantial. Olivia remained silent. Emily leaned forward. Why wasn't this included in the original reading? Richard smiled. Because William specifically instructed me not to. That answer somehow sounded perfectly reasonable coming from William Carter. The attorney continued reading. Then arrived at the unusual part. The part that explained everything. The trust may only be managed jointly. Silence. Richard continued. Both Emily Carter and Olivia Carter must serve as co-trustees. The room froze. Emily stared at him. Olivia stared at him. Neither appeared capable of processing the sentence. Richard kept reading. If either party refuses participation, the trust dissolves and transfers entirely to charitable organizations. The silence deepened. Then Olivia laughed. A short, disbelieving laugh. You're kidding. I'm not. Richard slid the document across the table. The instructions were clear. Very clear. Legally airtight. Entirely William. Emily rubbed her forehead. This can't be real. It's real. Richard looked almost entertained. Your grandfather spent a great deal of time making sure it was real. The room fell silent again. Because suddenly both sisters understood exactly what had happened. William planned this. Deliberately. Carefully. Years in advance. The old man had anticipated everything. The inheritance. The fallout. The distance. The possibility of reconciliation. Even now he was trying to teach one final lesson. Olivia leaned back in her chair, shaking her head. I can't believe him. Emily laughed despite herself. Neither could she. Richard reached for another document. A personal note was included. That immediately got their attention. The attorney unfolded a single page, then began reading. If you're both sitting there, then Richard successfully followed instructions. Both sisters smiled. The opening line sounded exactly like William. The note continued. I imagine neither of you is thrilled about this arrangement. A pause. I wasn't particularly concerned. The room laughed. Even Olivia. Even Emily. For a moment it felt like William was actually there. The note continued. You've both spent years learning different lessons. The smiles faded. The seriousness returned. Emily learned responsibility. A pause. Olivia learned humility. Another pause. Both are necessary. The room became quiet, very quiet, because even now, William seemed capable of reducing complicated lives into simple truths. Richard continued reading. Families don't survive because people avoid mistakes. The attorney turned the page. They survive because people eventually learn from them. Neither sister looked away. Neither interrupted. The final paragraph arrived. The trust isn't really about money. Emily smiled. She already knew. The old man always cared about lessons more than assets. Richard read the last lines. It's about whether two people can choose the future instead of the past. The note ended. The room remained silent. Not uncomfortable silence. Thoughtful silence. Several minutes passed. Finally, Richard closed the folder. Well, nobody responded. Eventually, Olivia looked toward Emily. The moment felt strangely familiar. Two sisters. One decision. Years of history sitting between them. The difference was that this time nobody was competing. Nobody was trying to win. Nobody was trying to prove anything. Emily considered the question carefully, then smiled. Want to give it a try? Olivia stared at her. For several seconds she didn't speak. Then she laughed softly, a genuine laugh. The kind Emily hadn't heard from her in years. Yeah. She nodded. Yeah, I do. And just like that, the decision was made. Not because the past disappeared. It hadn't. Not because forgiveness magically solved everything. It didn't. The decision happened because both sisters finally understood something William had been trying to teach them all along. A family isn't defined by its worst moment. It's defined by what happens afterward. And for the first time in nearly a decade, afterward finally looked possible. 5 years later, the photograph still sat on the shelf. The same photograph. The same dock. The same two little girls holding fishing poles that looked far too large for them. The frame now stood inside the main conference room at Carter Development. Most visitors assumed it was there because of family history. Only Emily understood the real reason. It was a reminder of how easy it is to lose sight of what matters, and how difficult it can be to find your way back. The years following the creation of the family trust had not been easy. They had been worth it. There was a difference. The trust required regular meetings, joint decisions, shared responsibility. At first, every conversation felt awkward. Years of history don't disappear simply because two people decide to move forward. Trust returns slowly, piece by piece, moment by moment, choice by choice. Some meetings lasted 5 minutes. Others lasted 3 hours. Some ended with agreement. Others ended with frustration. But the important thing was that they continued. Neither sister walked away. Neither quit. And over time, something remarkable happened. They stopped acting like opponents. Then, even more remarkably, they started acting like sisters. Not the sisters they were as children. Those people no longer existed. Life had changed them too much. Instead, they became something new. Two imperfect adults trying to build something healthier than what came before. The process wasn't dramatic. Most healing isn't. It happened through small moments. A phone call during a difficult week. A favor that didn't need to be repaid. A conversation that would have become an argument years earlier. Tiny moments. Meaningful moments. The kind William always paid attention to. The kind that reveal character. Olivia changed more than anyone expected, including herself. The community housing program eventually became a permanent part of her life. What started as occasional volunteer work grew into something larger. A purpose. A mission. Several affordable housing initiatives emerged from those efforts. Projects designed to help families who would otherwise be left behind. The work didn't make headlines. It didn't attract much attention. That was part of the reason she loved it. For the first time in her life, she was doing something without caring who noticed. William would have appreciated that. Emily often thought about that. Daniel changed too. The years humbled him, matured him. The mistakes of his past never disappeared. Neither did the consequences. But he spent the rest of his life trying to become someone worthy of the second chance he received. His marriage with Olivia survived, not because it was easy, because both of them finally stopped pretending, and honesty turned out to be far stronger than appearances. Meanwhile, Carter Development continued growing. Not rapidly, not recklessly, responsibly, exactly the way William would have wanted. Under Emily's leadership, the company expanded into new markets, created new jobs, supported new communities. The success mattered. The integrity mattered more. One afternoon, nearly 5 years after William's death, Emily stood once again in his old office. The room looked different now. Updated. modernized. Yet some things remained unchanged. The lake photograph, the old clock, several framed family pictures, pieces of history, pieces she intentionally preserved. A knock interrupted her thoughts. Olivia entered carrying a folder. Ready? Emily smiled. Probably not. Good, good. Olivia laughed. That means we're prepared. The two women reviewed trust documents for the next hour. Property updates, community projects, scholarship programs, the usual responsibilities. When the meeting ended, Olivia paused near the door, then glanced toward the photograph sitting on the bookshelf. The one from childhood. The one William loved. For a moment neither spoke. Finally Olivia broke the silence. I wish he could see this. Emily looked toward the same photograph. The same memory, the same reminder. Then she smiled. I think he did. The answer lingered between them. Comfortable. Certain. Because somehow both women understood. William never cared about the money. Not really. He never cared about winning. He never cared about appearances. He cared about character. Always character. The inheritance was simply a lesson. The company was simply a responsibility. The trust was simply an opportunity. The real legacy was something else. Growth. Accountability. Forgiveness. The willingness to become better than you were yesterday. Years earlier, Olivia believed success meant having more than everyone else. Years earlier, Emily believed losing Daniel was the worst thing that could ever happen to her. Both had been wrong. Success wasn't about ownership, and loss wasn't always destruction. Sometimes the things that break your life apart create space for something stronger, something healthier, something real. Late that afternoon, Emily drove to the lake house. The property remained in the family, exactly as William intended. The dock still stretched across the water. The trees still lined the shore. The lake still reflected the evening sky. Some things change. Some things don't. She walked to the end of the dock and sat down. The same place where William spent countless evenings. The same place where so many lessons began. The water remained calm. The sunset painted the horizon gold and orange. For several minutes she simply watched, listening to the wind, listening to the water, listening to the silence. Then she remembered something William once said. One of the many lessons that made more sense with age. The only thing that matters is who you are when nobody is watching. At the time she thought it was business advice. Later she thought it was a lesson about money. Now she understood. It was a lesson about life. Because in the end, people don't remember what you owned. They remember how you treated others. They remember what you built. They remember what you left behind. And William Carter had left behind far more than an estate. He left behind a family that finally understood what mattered. The sun slowly disappeared beyond the horizon. The lake darkened. The day ended. And for the first time in a very long time, everything felt exactly the way it was supposed to. After hearing the entire story, what would you have done if you were Emily? Would you have forgiven Olivia and given the relationship another chance? Or would some betrayals be impossible to move past? Let me know your thoughts in the comments.